Hello and welcome to SRIRAM's IES. Welcome to the first lecture of Indian economy by SRIRAM sir. In this lecture series, we will be discussing this entire book and we will be carrying this book in every lecture. I want all of you to have this book and then read it along with me. You will remember the stories, you will remember the concepts by heart. That is the promise I have made in the beginning of this video. So come and let's start the video. The first thing which we need to understand about economics is how societies produce, distribute and consume the resources in the face of scarcity. So therefore, we understand that naturally we are faced with scarcity. Scarcity of resources. Resources like land, labor or capital, I would say fossil fuels, I would say forests, minerals, food, everything is scarce in nature. So that is why whatever we consume out of this in order to produce or distribute the goods is all what is the matter of economy. What all does, I would say, constitute all of this, the production, the consumption, the distribution of all the natural resources, of all the man-made resources, manufactured or services, whichever we produce, is the matter or subject matter of economics. So let's understand the first concept of economy, that is, how did we move from barter system to modern economics? In the barter system, you all might be remembering that we used to trade goods with the goods. Okay. What does barter system mean actually? That is simple, that you give me tomatoes, I will give you potatoes. But the problem is that if A is having tomatoes and B is having potatoes, both A and B should have a want or a need of the other product. That is the double coincidence. The double coincidence of wants. This barter system tried to fulfill only one thing, that was the basic necessities, food, shelter, clothing, electricity, transport. Our reliance on natural resources depends on the basic necessities, and once these basic necessities are to be met, we need to exchange what we have with what we do not have. For example, if I have too many clothes in my wardrobe, I will exchange them with some amount of food which I do not have in my kitchen. That is where barter system comes in. Therefore, barter system was to exchange the surplus of goods and services without money, and this was limited in scope and complexity. Why? Because this barter system comes up with a limitation of double coincidence of want. That is, whatever I have, you should want that, and whatever you have, I should be having a need of that. Then only we can exchange it. And it comes with one more limitation, that is how to set standards for exchange of these two items. How to measure that how much of tomatoes should be equal to how many potatoes. Does 10 tomato equal to 1 potato, or I would say 1 tomato equal to 2 potatoes? Who will set this standard? As we know that, for example, rupees 60 equals to 1 kg of tomatoes. That is just a basic set, or that is what we currently understand economy as. But back then in barter system, this was not possible. So therefore, modern economy, the social activity where people produce, trade and consume goods and services through markets. Because if you remember that today we have, I would say, traveled a long distance in terms of economics from barter system to modern economics, when we had no concept of money, till now where we are using digital currency, where we are using cryptocurrency, where we have SWIFT system and an internationally accepted currency in terms of dollar. Now remember that from being or from having no money, or from having stone money, leather money or paper money, then plastic money, then metal money, gold coins, silver coins, copper coins, jittal, tanka, all of this we have grown to rupee, we have grown to dollar, sterling, pound, yen, renminbi, what not do we have, ruble. And then not only these fiat currencies, but also the digital currencies, the plastic money, the banking system, checks, bonds, shares, instruments, or I would say receipts. Now this growth of economy is interesting. So therefore, let's understand that how we outgrow the barter system to the modern economics or cryptocurrency. Now we will not be going into cryptocurrency, but we will be reading that what made us to move out of barter system, that was the limitations of barter system. Take it, what was the limitation? Suppose a shoemaker has shoes to sell to the apple seller. Why? Because he needs apples to eat. What happens if the shoemaker doesn't like apples? What happens if the shoemaker doesn't want apples? Or he actually wants a lawyer to get divorce? That is where Yuval Noah Harari gives us an example that this barter system comes with the limitation that if A wants what B has, but B do not want what A has, B rather wants what C has. That is where the problem comes in. A is the owner of tomatoes, B is the owner of potatoes, C has onions. A wants potatoes, but B wants onions. How will there be a trade between A and B? That is the problem of barter system. Further, therefore, this barter system failed to fulfill this double coincidence of wants. Today, barter system does survive. That is where UPSC will set a trap for you. Is there any instance in modern day economics where barter system exists? Yes, it can exist in two places. First, between the nations when there is no currency. If, for example, Brazil and India want to trade between each other. Brazil wants to sell, say, lithium to India, and India wants to pay Brazil in terms of rupees because India has rupees only. But Brazil will not accept rupees. India will say, okay, I will give you dollars. Brazil says, no, I do not want dollars also. Then what do you want? I want something else. What do you want? I want another good from India. What kind of good should India give Brazil? For example, Brazil will ask for thorium or monazite sands, which are found in the coasts of Kerala. So therefore, there is a trade between Brazil and India in which Brazil is giving us lithium blocks and we are giving them thorium or monazite sands. Understood? So therefore, it is a barter system, but where there is no existence of money to trade between the two countries. Second, where can barter system happen? When people lose the trust over money. This happens in terms of hyperinflation. What inflation comes up with is when rupee loses its purchasing power. When rupee losing its purchasing power, when the currency loses its purchasing power, people tend to have less faith on the currency. People lose the faith on the government who is backing the currency. That is where people will try that, okay, I will exchange this remote with this book. I will give my phone to someone to purchase this book rather than using money to change the book or rather than using money to purchase anything. That is where the barter system will come in place. These are the two things which you should remember for UPSC prelims. Understood? Chalo. Now let's move to the core of economics. What is economics? Economics basically is a Greek word. It talks about oikos and nomos. These are two Greek words, oikos and nomos. What it actually means? It means household. Oikos means household and norms. Nomos means the norms or the laws. Do you understand that in your house also, the father or the mother, they talk about that this is the rule of our house, this is the custom of our house, this is the tradition of our house, this is what we believe in? Or have you learned about this thing that in our society it is done in this manner, in our country it is done in this manner, so we believe in this thing. Now these are the household norms, these are the management of household resources. If you try to understand it properly, a household or a country or a family or a clan which I introduced to you in the first introduction or introductory video of this series, that is, we outgrow from or we grew from single person or single human to family to society to clan to state to country and to this world. We united this world together with the globalization. But understand one more thing which you need to remember, that is that this household and the norms which are set in the household are somehow similar to the norms which are set in the country, which are set in the state, which are set across the globe. That is why this economics started with the science of household. It started that who will earn. Father will go to, I would say, job. He will earn something and bring back to home. Mother will take care of home. Children will go to school. They will come back. They will be the resources, and then they will also go to the market to earn goods or to earn, I would say, in the earlier times when it was barter system, they were earning the goods or they were earning the labor, or now currently they are earning salaries, they are earning wages. That is how this science of households, or the, I would say, the study of rational management of resources of a household took place from households to the international economy. Understood? Therefore, one more thing which you need to remember, that people have multiple needs, but available resources are scarce. As I said, that there is scarcity in the resources. We do not have enough resources for everyone's need. As Gandhiji says that there is enough for everyone's need but not enough for everyone's greed. And hereby I will give you a homework also, that is, you need to learn about the Earth Overshoot Day. Just search this on Google and try to learn about it. What is Earth Overshoot Day? One more thing which you need to remember is, this holds true from households to nation states to the global economy. That is, everywhere we have multiple needs. We try to monopolize and militarize space also, and we are yet faced with the complexity that we have hunger in our own country. Therefore, the rational management of limited resources to maximize the well-being of in the face of scarcity is what is needed and what is the subject matter of economy. Understood? Therefore, I'll give you a simple example. For example, India, which hosts around 17.75% of global population. If you can understand, India's share of world population is how much? Around 18%. But how much land does India have? Only 2.4% of the global land. Now, if you understand this, that currently in India we have a crisis of land, because in India land is scarce. Not only land, but also in Delhi, if you see, air is scarce, pure air or clean air is scarce. Why? Because we are facing the pollution. Not only there, but in Africa, food is scarce, there is poverty, there is hunger. Or if I say in the Russia and Ukraine, Israel and Palestine, peace is scarce. There is no peace. So therefore, you need to understand that there are different problems in different regions. A resource can be scarce in some place and a resource can be in abundance in some place. So therefore, the disparity creates stress on land use, agriculture, manufacturing, forestry, residential purposes. Further, you need to understand this scarcity led state to pass an act. Now, due to the scarcity of land, as a state, India passed an act known as the Land Acquisition, Rehabilitation and Resettlement Act 2013. This addresses the competing land claims in India. Why? To fulfill or to solve the scarcity of land. Understood? So therefore, there is a debate between needs and wants of humans. That is, need is necessary for our survival, but want is something which we desire as luxury, which we desire beyond the basic needs. Further, you need to understand that how did this science of economy emerged? Economics, the dismal science. What do we understand by dismal science? That is, it was back then a debate between I would say economists. Just to make sure that you understand it properly, I will give you an example or a description about the debate between Thomas Carlyle and the Malthusian theory. Now back then it was discussed under the Malthusian population theory. Malthus says that in an economy, population grows geometrically. While as food grows arithmetically. Now what do we understand by this? That is, that population grows in larger numbers, while as food supply increases in less numbers. So therefore, geometrical exponentially, or it grows in geometrical exponential forms, or the arithmetic expressions. I would say that if an economy, I would say, for example, if there is one person, he will give birth to two, or these two will give birth to 2 and 2. So therefore, it will go to 1, 4 and 8. That will be the geometric progression for population, while as for the food security, it will be 2, 4, 6, 8. Understood? That is why you need to understand that between the Malthus and Carlyle, there was a debate. The debate was that if we tend to follow the population theory, it means that every time there will be a crisis of food, which will lead to what? Famine, which will lead to disease, which will lead to deaths of people. That is why there needs to be a balance between population and food security. Understood? And in order to understand this, Malthus says that we need to control population. We need to install positive checks, and there should be that in the events when there is increase in mortality, or when there is increase in famine, or when there is increase in disease, war, natural, we need to show up and bring in some preventive checks. State should give, I would say, state should tend to install birth control. State should try to provide or delay marriages, moral restraint, and that is why the debate of Malthus or the Malthusian theory of population comes into picture. But Thomas Carlyle, he says that economy is basically a dismal science. Why? Because he says, or not because of the Malthus population theory, but to criticize the liberal economists. Who were these liberal economists? Like John Stuart Mill. Why these liberal economists were criticized? You need to understand that who were these liberal economists and what was their perspective. Liberal economy talks about that all the producers and consumers will have their own understanding, their own rationality, that I need to produce for what? For my own profit, or I need to consume because I have needs and wants. Therefore, all the producers and all the consumers, they will act on their own, in their own rationality. Therefore, they should be let free to produce and to consume whatever they have. That was the first argument of liberal economists, John Stuart Mill. Why was it there? Because they wanted everyone to have freedom. They wanted everyone to be free of slavery. They wanted everyone to have that rationality that they can produce and they can consume, or they can have the control of distribution of resources. Now, if you understand this, that they were actually promoting free market economics and abolition of slavery. Now, that was the free liberal economists. You also need to remember that Malthus' theory or Thomas Carlyle's debate was to dismiss all these egalitarian principles, that everyone is equal, everyone should do whatever they like. And they say, Thomas Carlyle says that all of them are promoting the gay science. Why so? Because it was back then the gay science, it was to show that this economics or the theories of liberal economics are actually dismal theories. Now, if you understand this, today's economists embrace the term, the gay science term. Why so? Because they understand that Thomas Carlyle was not only about, or he was not only criticizing the liberal economists, he was actually trying to establish that there is a proper role of state to control the resources, to distribute the resources, to make sure that everyone gets whatever they have to do with their needs and wants. Therefore, today's economics talks about the realities of current market, that is the resource scarcity, difficult trade-offs and economic constraints. Now, if you understand this, you must also understand that there is, so thereby connecting the three authors or four authors or the economists of the time, whether that was Thomas Carlyle, whether that was the Simon Kuznets, they all started to develop the theories of the subject, and this led to the evolution of the subject. Kuznets' curve is somehow one thing which we have to connect to the developmental aspect and the growth aspect of economics, because economics as a subject, as we discussed in the first slide also, was about the distribution, production and consumption of goods and services. Thereby, Simon Kuznets also gives us a thought about the distribution aspect of the economy. He says that whenever you see the economic growth, the production, the inequality at first will increase. You don't need to worry about the concepts. We will come back again to the concepts once we do the foundation. Once we do this book, we will be again reiterating these concepts. For example, in the chapter of inequality, we will discuss the Kuznets curve in detail. Hereby, we are setting the paradigm for the first introductory chapter, the first chapter of our book, that is economy and economics. That is why we are just referring to the concepts and the evolution of this subject. Thereby, he says that inequality will initially increase and then it will, with the economic growth, it will start decreasing. Why? The effects of growth will start percolating to other, as I would say, sectors of the economy. Thereby comes the Kuznets curve and Simon Kuznets. However, you also need to remember that in the early industrialization era, when the early industrialization came in the Europe, it came along with some nuances also, like this early industrialization was accompanied by child labor, inhumane capacity, or I would say inhumane conditions or work conditions. Humans were, labor was supposed to work for 18 hours a day, 16 hours a day, which led to the alienation of labor from the state, then from the society, then from the family, then from alienation of self, which later gave the prospect to communist economy. And that developed the thought of communist economy, that this economic model or the capitalistic economic model comes with the alienation of self. That is why they started to develop another thought, a counter thought to the free market economics, to which this free market economics was somehow supposed and supported by the liberal economists or these economists like Simon Kuznets. So Kuznets, once he talks about these initiatives and all of this between the debate of Carlyle, Thomson, I would say Simon Kuznets, and there was one more author who actually led to the macroeconomic studies, that was William B. Phillips, and he developed the machine known as Moniac. This Moniac machine was the first machine which actually depicted and showed, represented practically that how the circular flow of economy actually helps how the money actually circulates in the economy. So what he did was he developed a machine in which there were tubes, glass tubes, which were connected to different parts. He represented that machine with the model which we usually use in economics, or which we use in circular flow of economics, in which there are households, there are firms, they are interconnected. Firms usually, they do supply goods, and the households, they pay for those goods, thereby he marked them with a different color, and they pay for these goods, therefore the households will pay rupees for these goods and they will send goods and services. Also, these households will supply labor, to which firms will pay back wages. Now this labor, once the wages are earned, they will start to save these wages. Now these savings led to development of financial institutions like banks or NBFCs. Now these savings, in order to channelize them back into the investment cycle, these financial institutions started giving loans to these firms. That was the one more addition to the circular flow. Further, these firms and households, they were controlled. All this market in which these two are working, this was controlled by the government, and this government, with the growing inequality, with the child labor and inhumane work capacities, started working through taxes and welfare schemes or subsidies, started working and imposing subsidies into the market, giving subsidies into the market and imposing taxes on the market players, on both households and firms. Further, the needs and wants of these people in the market, whether that was household or firms, were not met by the domestic market. That is why they started transacting with the external sector. So all of this was shown by the Moniac machine through different colored waters. We will go through that in the second lecture, and we will see that how macroeconomics actually developed. But once this debate of all of this development and growth was happening, there was one more thing, that is the scarcity, which we read in the first slide, was about that natural resources are scarce enough. There is scarcity of land, labor, capital. There is scarcity of entrepreneurship. There is scarcity of everything. Every resource is scarce in its nature. That is why, due to the limited nature of these resources, what we need to do is, we need to do rational management. So thereby, rationality comes into picture, and rationality gives birth to rational decision making. And this decision making, that is a rational choice. Every choice comes with an opportunity, and every opportunity comes with an opportunity cost, which is associated with the alternative foregone. So that is why our book talks about the trade-off. So thereby, what is trade-off? Trade-off is simply, if I give you a 10 crore rupees investment, a seed capital, for you to invest into some business. Now it is up to you, whatever you choose. Either you choose to invest in phone industry, or in remote industry, or in textile industry. Now it is up to you which choice would you like to make, or you can invest it into your education, into your child's future, into your future, into the health, or living a better life. Now, once you take one opportunity, you have to do what? Trade-offs. Governments also at the national level have to do the trade-offs. When it was discussed that should we pursue one goal or another goal, it was dependent on what? The goals or pursuing of these goals was dependent on what? It was dependent on the choice or the decision making by the government, because governments had a role in market to control, and that is why government had competing goals, like should government or should you, while you were investing it into the textile sector or the phone industry, whichever you choose, you are trading off your choices, because you are trading off your wish to have phones in the market with the wish to have clothes in the market. Government also wants to pursue goals. It wants to pursue development also, growth also, welfare also, child labor, or I would say eradication of child labor, I would say the eradication of slavery. All of this was discussed because if you remember, it was discussed by Carlyle that the eradication of slavery or abolition of slavery and free market economics, which was given by the capitalist or the liberal economists at that point of time, they discussed about the free market economics. This free market economics comes along with abolition of slavery, abolition of the market control of the government. However, government had to pursue some goals like, should government invest in food grains for all of us, or should they save the money and ensure fiscal prudence? What is fiscal prudence? That they manage their resources properly, whatever they are earning. Suppose I will tell you that usually our parents used to tell us the story that we used to eat less. We used to eat less so that we can save money for your education, so that we can save money for your marriage. That is something which might seem common to you. Similarly, government has to save the money. Government has to ensure that whether they will invest in food grains, whether they will let people eat belly full, or whether they will save money for their fiscal prudence. They do not have to borrow money. They will decrease the fiscal deficit. That is why governments target to control fiscal deficit according to Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act is at 3%. However, for the next year, financial year 26, the target of current government is to keep fiscal deficit at 4.4%. Why so? Because we already had to invest a lot of money, borrow a lot of money because of what? Because of the crisis and post-COVID recovery, which we had to invest in. Similarly, Great Nicobar project, this comes along with two trade-offs. One is that should we save environment or should we do tribal development? Or should we ensure that the strategic location of Nicobar Islands is particularly used for the development of the country? That is one trade-off. Therefore, in economy, we do these trade-offs. That should we supply this water to the drought regions or drought-prone regions, or should we save this money and invest it back somewhere else, or should we preserve the Panna Tiger Reserve? Because if we start making or start developing this Ken-Betwa link project, river linking project, it will destroy somehow the conservation areas of Panna Tiger Reserve. It will hamper the habitat of tigers in this region. Thereby, government has to choose between these two. Similarly, post-COVID era also come up with the challenges. This post-COVID era, government faced a dilemma that should we invest in what? Should we invest in to protect the public health, or should we invest in livelihood? If we go for a lockdown, complete lockdown, public health may be saved. People may be saved, they will not get infected with COVID. Or should we do what? Should we let people go? And because we are imposing a lockdown, people will be restricted to their homes, thereby they will not be able to go out and earn some livelihood. Therefore, we have to sacrifice between the two. We have to ensure their livelihood also. We have to ensure that they do not get infected also. RBI also has a similar, I would say, dilemma, which it deals with every day. RBI recently decreased its repo rate to 5.5%, and there is a debate that it should further decrease this repo rate, because currently we are witnessing, in the month of October, we were witnessing an inflation rate of 1.5%, which is far less than the goals which we have as per the inflation targeting. As per the inflation targeting, our inflation should be around 2% to 6%. It should not go less than 2%. That is why RBI has to understand that when to decrease the repo rate so that prices get up, or when to increase the repo rate so that prices in the market get decreased. money in the market gets controlled. That is why you need to understand the government also is imposing limits on its fiscal deficit and public debt. Thereby, these trade-offs are done by government. However, every trade-off comes with an opportunity. For example, I will tell you. See, there were two options over here with the government. One was health, another was livelihood, or I would say economic growth. In COVID times, government was supposed either to protect the health of people, invest heavily in the health of people, or to let people live their life and earn their livelihood whatsoever cost them, even if it costs their life. So government chose to protect the health of people. Understood? Thereby, government imposed a complete lockdown, ensured that COVID vaccines are built, gave money or invested into COVID vaccines, and I would say produced a lot of vaccines, ensured that vaccination at national level is being done. Therefore, public got vaccinated and everyone was healthy. They saved the lives. What it cost was a growth, or I would say degrowth rate of 24%. Our economy was minus 24% growth rate. Our economy faced a minus 24% growth rate in the third quarter of that year. Only because of what? Because we imposed this. Thereby, these trade-offs, that when we traded off health or livelihood with health, we forgone livelihood and we chose health. It comes with a cost. What is that cost? That cost is known as opportunity cost. We chose the first alternative and forgone the second alternative. This alternative was forgone and this costed us something. That cost was minus 24% growth rate, and that cost is known as opportunity cost. That is why in economics rational decision making is important, pertinent, because every decision comes with a cost, and for not choosing the second best alternative, it causes us what? A cost to that alternative. That was minus 24% of growth rate. Thereby, I will also give you a simple example which is given in the book also. That is, that if banks, or if you have 10,000 rupees, 1 lakh rupees, you have a choice either to invest it into bank or to invest it into stock market. For example, if you invest it into bank, it will earn you 8% of interest rate if you invest it in a fixed deposit. But if you invest it in stock market, it will give you, I guess, around 20% of return. But this 20% of return comes with a risk associated to it. Now it is up to you whether you want to take the risk, whether you choose low interest, high risk, or this low interest, low risk, or high interest, high risk. That is up to you. Every choice comes with a cost, and you have to bear that cost, and that is known as opportunity cost. Similarly, land being a limited resource, government has to take proper decisions that where should we invest into this land? Should I build a hospital or a school? Should I build or give this land to a private investor? Or should the government give it to the municipal park or auction the land and sell it to the highest bidder? These all come up with a cost. That is where the role of government comes in place. That is where economics comes in place. Understood? Now, if you understood the subject of economics, if you have understood the subject matter of the economics, now you need to understand that where do we read this economics? Where do we study the economics? Where do we study the science of economics? We started with micro level. That is simple. At the basic level, at the lowest level, it is a transaction between you and me. It is a transaction between father and son. It is a transaction between you and the shopkeeper. You want to purchase a pen. You will go to the shopkeeper. You will ask him that what is the price of this pen. He will say it is 10,000 rupees or 1,000 rupees. You will see that no, I can find better alternatives of this in lesser price. You will go to another shop, then another shop, then another shop. Wherever you get your need satisfied at the best, that is where you will go and purchase and make that purchase. Now this transaction between you and that shopkeeper is to be studied by microeconomics. Every firm, how they set price of this product, how they manufacture this product, why are they designing this product into this manner, and what all does a firm do to ensure that their product gets maximum price and maximum profit in the market. What all do a firm has to produce in a good, along with a good, so that the consumer gets maximum satisfaction. What all can we do at the national level so that all the resources are utilized at the best possible manner and we get our potential GDP at the earliest. Now, if we understand this at the micro level, at the firm level, at one unit level, we are studying what? Microeconomics. But at the national level, where we are talking about the entire country, India from north to south, from Jammu Kashmir to Kerala, from Gujarat to northeastern regions, wherever we are studying this whole economy, this is known as macroeconomics. But whenever we talk about a particular sector, a particular region, for example, the coastal regions, their economy is dependent on what? On the health of the sea, on the health of the fishes. It is fishing industry. We have to read it, study it in a different perspective. When we talk about northeast, where bamboo economy is there leading, when we talk about the north, or I would say northern states or the Himalayan states, where the horticulture is leading the economy, we have to understand that every sector has a different need and needs a different theory and different science to be understood. That is why it is known as mesoeconomics. Understood? So thereby it is micro at the lower level, meso at the regional level, and macroeconomics at the national level. Understood? Now moving ahead, you also need to remember that the evolution of this economics or subject was basically, it started with wealth creation. That is, was the argument given by Adam Smith, the father of economics. He said that economics actually deals with production, distribution and exchange of goods so that we create wealth, and it is the science of wealth. Okay? It is not the science of money, it is the science of wealth. How nations make wealth, how nations get wealthier, how a nation can acquire that wealthiest nation position. Understood? How you can have the wealth. That is what economics talks about. He says that there should be free market economics. Why? Why should there be free market economics? Why so? Because I will produce this remote, and if I am producing it in 100 rupees, I will try to sell it in 10,000 rupees. That is how I will make wealth. Are you understanding? Because I produced it in 100 rupees, I sold it in 10,000 rupees, my profit is 9,900 rupees. I will invest a small fraction of this 9,900 rupees, maybe 900 rupees back, and 9,000 is my wealth, and I saved it. Somewhere I parked it. That is where should be free market economics. But tell me, who is there going to come and control my price? The consumer. Because when I sell it in 9,900 rupees, there will be, or 10,000 rupees, there will be thousands of such people who will come up and start making this product. Why will they make this product? Because everyone is thinking that there is a lot of profit in this product. But now the product is with everyone and everyone wants to sell it. Now buyers are less. Why? Because every buyer has a lot of options to purchase it from. And once it comes to a lot of options, the bargaining power of the seller gets decreased. Now this bargaining power is shifted to consumer. Now the seller and consumer has to come to an agreement. Therefore this price will start decreasing, and it will fix, or it will be, I would say, it will reach an equilibrium where both consumer and the seller will agree to make the transaction happen. And that price is known as equilibrium price, where the supply and the demand is matching each other. That is why both consumer and the producer will make rational choices. They will sell it at a rational price so that it fulfills the need of the consumer. It fulfills the satisfaction, the utility of the consumer. That is why he says that should be free market economics and government should have no role into it. And he also says that there is an invisible hand in the market. This invisible hand will ask or will tend to function in such a manner that both consumers and producers make rational choices. And once they make rational choices, then the transaction will be set at an equilibrium price. Understood? Thereby, the father of economics says that there should be less role of government into the market. And he says that self-interest is the basic driving force behind producers and consumers to promote societal good. That is, once they are producing or once they are consuming, this will lead to societal goods also. This will lead to unintentional societal goods. Like, for example, in 2026, economics will mark 250 years since the foundational text was published. Which text? The Wealth of Nations. Understood? Now, you need to understand that how unintentionally will producers and consumers produce the social goods. Like, if I say that I am producing these remotes or I am producing these pens, in such scenario, I will be creating employment. I will be giving employment to people, I will be sharing salaries, I will be giving them salaries, I will be giving them wages, thereby it will lead to development and growth of all. It is not just me as a producer who is growing out of this economy or out of this invisible hand or out of this market. This invisible hand will force me to create all of these social goods. All of the social good. That is why he says that government has got less role into the market, because all of the social goods will be created unintentionally by the producers and consumers. Understood? That is why this invisible hand starts acting, because every producer and consumer starts acting in their self-interest and they start unintentionally producing the social and public benefits. There is no moral intent which is needed to do this. Why? Because only rational intent is money, and once the money is created, once the production and consumption is created, it will create the social goods. How? First, producer will tend to adopt best technology and he will have best pricing so that he can compete with all the other people. Distributors will use optimal logistics to transport and store the products. Consumers will seek best goods and services for their money, because they have limited money. They will have best alternatives, best goods they will purchase at the best to best price. Therefore, the self-centered rationalities add up to collective welfare of all. This is invisible hand, and that is how it guides the economy without government regulation. Now, once we understand the concept of invisible hand, we need to understand that the liberal economists, they are talking to us about what? That there should be less government's role into the market. And this gave the birth to liberalism. However, this liberalism comes with limitations, or economic liberalism comes with limitations. What are these limitations? First, market failure. Because the distribution of income is inefficient. This causes inequality, as was discussed by Simon Kuznets. He says that first the inequality will increase, later on it will decrease. But how much time will it take to decrease? That is the question. Stock markets crash, regional imbalances are there, and climate change also comes to play a role. And that is why the liberal markets started failing. There is a rationality myth, which Adam Smith gave us, that everyone is rational in their choices, but everyone is not rational. This rationality comes with a myth. Producers usually try to maximize their product profit. How? Do you remember that COVID-19 times, a simple N95 mask was sold in around 1000 rupees, which costs otherwise 100 rupees. That is how the rationality myth gets bursted. Understood? Even if it causes human misery, even if it causes one's life, the sellers, the producers will not vouch from that thing. They will not take a step back from making maximum profit possible. Understood? Thereby, it will increase inequality, it will increase environmental degradation. Information asymmetry, consumers lack reliable information because you do not know what is the price of this product at every shop. because there is no one single platform where you will get all the shops information at one place. That is where the choices of consumers get restricted. That is where producers have an upper edge, and that is where government has to come and play its role to benefit both consumers and producers. That is what was the question to liberalists or to the liberal economists, that how are you I would say arguing on this thing that government has no role in the market. Government has a role, and that is why it led to the crisis of 2008 global financial crisis, where the market failure happened and this liberal economist perspective was challenged, which led to the growth of neoliberalism, the new liberalism. The return of this liberalism by 20th century said that the Soviet communism's failure, the champions of free market, globalization, privatization and price deregulation, they came up again and they said that there should be high scale privatization and the role of government should get eradicated. Why? Because when there was liberal perspective, as I said, that free market economics was there, inequality came up, everything came up, the limitations of this free market economics came up. This led to the growth of communist ideas. This led to the growth of that this economy, the liberal economy, comes up with these limitations. Thereby, we should have state to control everything, state to own everything, state to have ownership of everything, state to regulate all the economy. And that led to the growth of Soviet Union. And Soviet Union was one of such communist or socialist economies where government has had a maximum role to play in the economy. But in 1990s or in the late 20th century, Soviet Union actually failed. And due to the failure of Soviet Union in 1900s, 1980s, 1990s, after that, the liberalists came up more aggressive and they started to work for more privatization. They said that there is a decreased role of the government. Thereby, they started privatizing the steel industries, railways, airways, airports, gas, electricity. In Donald Trump's era, he discarded the Obamacare, the insurance which was given, the food coupons. Recently, in 2 months back in the, I would say, newspapers, the finance bill of USA government was not passed, and which led to the stopping of the largest national level food package program of USA. The food coupons or the debit cards on which they get some reward points, and they go to the consumer, or I would say the citizens of USA, they go to grocery stores, they get some benefits on those cards and they purchase the grocery. And that grocery or those debit cards were not given the money. This, I would say it was in September month, September or October month, the news came up that USA's, the largest food bill of USA, it was not passed. He froze the foreign aid in 2025. That is, he took back step from state's role into the economy. Even our Prime Minister also said that government has no business in doing business. And that is why we also, since 1991, started privatizing a large level. In 2025, we allowed 100% FDI in insurance sector. We liberalized our investments, we reduced the corporate tax in order to help private sector boost up. That was neoliberalism. COVID-19, when it came some years back, 2019, it challenged the capitalistic, or I would say neoliberalist thought. It said that, or it managed to get the state its role back. Because if you remember, a lot of people of India, citizens of India, were trapped in different places. Whether there comes a state, I would say, conflict, whether there was COVID-19, everyone or every flight refused to rescue, or I would say that bring back people of India from other nations. Every flight, every airways, every pilot, they said no. But Air India was the only, I would say, airline which was run by government, and at that point of time, Air India took the initiatives, and every corner of the world, every flight was sent to the corners of the world and brought people back to India. That was the role of state. State came up with aid for food. State came up with Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana. State came up with food grains delivered at doorsteps. That brought back the role of state and questioned the neoliberal premises in post-2020 era. Thereby, even the liberals now believe that state has an important role in building the human capital and human capacities. Now, once we are done with the role of state, we need to understand what is political economy. This political economy talks about that politics and economics goes hand in hand and must be studied together to understand the public policy decisions like Indian government or Indian constitution post 1950s, 1951, once we started the land reforms. The first constitutional amendment act came in 1951 and we saw the reforms or we saw the land reforms coming up. Why were land reforms brought in? To understand the aspects of distributive justice, redistributive justice. The land which was earlier with the zamindars, with the money lenders only, this land had to be distributed back to the people. That is why land reforms came. State came up with bank nationalization in 1980s. Why bank nationalization? Because financial inclusion was one such question to be pursued on. US-China trade war happened in 2016. Why? US-China trade war? Because of the tariffs. Because of the dumping of goods by China into US market. Because of rising debt of US economy from Chinese. Now, if you understand this, the political economy, that the politics and economics are together hand in hand, then we will move on to the next aspect, that is the Keynesian economy. Keynesian economy talks about, and this is the widely talked about approach of economics, and Keynesian economics says that whenever a state, or I would say whenever an economy has, whenever an economy faces a recession or an economy slows down or the growth of the economy slows down, at that point of time, you must understand that government has a role to play. Government has to provide fiscal stimulus. Why fiscal stimulus? Because economy is driven by money, and if there is no money in the economy, economy will not work. And whenever the economy stops working, what does that mean? The production in the economy is decreasing. And when the production is decreasing, there is no growth. At that point of time, when there is no growth, there is no demand. When there is no demand, government must come up and spend some money, inject some money into the economy so that economy gets revived. That is Keynesian economy. It talks about that government actually borrows and spends on infrastructure, which crowds in the private investment to create employment and demand. India's 9.5% fiscal deficit was there in 2020-2021. Why so? Because India wanted to increase the demand. India wanted to wake up its economy. India wanted to invest back after COVID-19. Why? Because there was no growth, there was no demand in the automobile sector. That is why India borrowed money from outside and invested into the local economy, into domestic economy, so that economy gets revived up. National infrastructure pipeline of 111 lakh crore rupees was stated interest-free 50-year loan was given to states in 22-23, and that is how pump priming actually works. Further, monetary stimulus is given by central bank. Central bank, in order to supply more money into the market, it decreases its policy rates, and once it decreases policy rates, interests get decreased, and then the loans get cheaper. People take the loan and people convert the loan into investment, and that is how economy gets revived. Further, we also discussed till now, we were discussing the role of government into economics, and with this we come to one more aspect, that is communist economy and socialist economy. In communist economy, complete government ownership of economy is there, and there is no private property For example, Soviet Union. While as in the socialist economy, a mixed set of communist economy where there is public sector and private sector, they coexist with each other, or the socialist economy, or I would say the economic model which we took up, the socialist model of democracy, or I would say socialist model of economy, which was passed back then under the Nehruvian era, and this in Indian context is known as Nehruvian economics, but in Chinese context it was known as the Chinese socialism. Understood? That is, there was private sector but at a lower level, largely control was with government. So Nehruvian era, state ownership of infrastructure was there, higher education, metal and other industries were centralized and centrally planned. There are central level planning. That is why we see 5-year plans. We have in total 12 5-year plans which we have to read one by one. One more thing which we need to remember, Soviet success. In the initial eras, it showed that there can be a path to equitable growth where everyone is growing and there is no inequality, which happened only because of the liberal economists. And this gave a solution that there should be no inequality. But it also showed that welfare state can exist, equity can be there, self-reliance can be ensured by ensuring independence. And that is why the private sector at independence level, once we got independence, was very insignificant, lesser in I would say its presence, or lesser share of private sector was there at the independence times. Then comes the Gandhian economy. Gandhian economy actually talks about that everyone and every section of the population, every sector of the economy should have equal development or should have equity in the growth of the country. For example, he says, or the famous quote of Gandhiji is about that every person's need can be met, but nothing can be done for every person's greed. That is, earth has sufficient things for everyone's need, but not for everyone's greed. Why so? Because man's greed is unlimited. A man's greed can never be filled, and it is famously said that only the dirt can fill the belly of a person. Because if you see, if a man is given a value of gold, he will ask for another value, and then if he is given second value, he will ask for one more. He will ask for one more until the belly of that man reaches the dirt. Because the greed, or we will read about the marginal utility, and we will see that utility or the diminishing marginal utility never gets fulfilled of a person, because in some of the sections like money, bribe, corruption, power, these things never satisfy. Even if you have, even if you are the wealthiest person of this world. Now, Gandhian economy talks about local resources to meet local needs. It talks about full employment, labor intensive growth for abundant work. It talks about minimum wants, dignity of labor, self-sufficiency, bread and labor, that everyone does manual work to meet basic needs. It talks about trusteeship model, that is the surplus wealth held as a trust, held as a I would say trust of the poorest. It says that state should act as a trusteeship, because every money or every wealth or every penny saved in a country, entire country, should be with the state, and state should take care of the money, that this money belongs to the poorest of all, not utilize that money irrationally, which we usually see in the news. However, then comes the developmental economics. Developmental economics basically talks about, and this came up after World War II, that is why UPSC in 2025 asked a question. UPSC 2025 asked a question about IBRD. Then when was IBRD created? Why was it created? To rebuild Europe post World War II. Third, it helps the developing nations by giving them grants. Now understand that UPSC asked a question and it comes from the developmental economics, that is post World War II, the decolonized countries faced poverty, inequality, and that is where the institutions of international level came up, World Bank, IBRD, IMF, they came up to help these developing nations to rebuild themselves, to give them grants, to decrease poverty, eradicate poverty, ensure that people are no more hungry. And this gives birth to developmental economics, where inclusive growth, human well-being, sabka saath, sabka vikas, or education, health, sustainable development goals, this all comes up together in the developmental economics. Understood? Now comes the state capitalism. Now, we till now we have discussed that economics and politics are thereby political economy, and now we were in the initial phases talking about liberal economics, and in the second phase we talked about state ownership, or I would say communist economics or socialist economics. Now the two things were different. Liberal economics talks about free market. What does that mean? That no role should be given to government, everything should be privatized. However, socialist economy or communist economy talks about a higher role for government or the total role of government, and there should be no private sector. But China comes up with a new different aspect. This was something which we usually refer to as Washington consensus. But China comes up with Beijing consensus. What is that? That there should be market economy, there should be privatization in specific sectors. However, the role of state as a regulating factor should not be decreased. The authoritarian state should never be replaced. There should be always a role to authoritarian state. It should dominate, it should be a dominating player by owning and controlling businesses. And it offered as a rival to the Washington consensus, which was set up over here. Understood? Like state sets the long-term strategic goals, multi-year plans, mix of state, market and redistribution, government bailouts to large companies. They also protect the large companies, but they do not leave the large companies aside. Understood? So thereby you need to understand that this was Beijing consensus, which was a rival to Washington consensus, and that is where comes a debate that how mercantilism and neo-mercantilism comes up in picture. Classical mercantilism, which was earlier during the colonial era or before the colonial era, it was that the imperial countries forced the colonies to export raw material exclusively and import finished goods, accumulating gold and silver, like it was the case with India also, which was once called as the golden sparrow. India faced a colonial era in which the raw material from India was exported or was sent to Britain and thereby was converted to finished goods through the industries which were set up during Industrial Revolution, and those cheap finished goods were brought back into Indian markets at a higher cost and thereby were purchased by local Indians by giving away their gold, by giving away their silver, and this gold and silver, the bullion, was taken back to Britain. That is how Britain got power. That is how France, Spain, Germany, Poland got power from their colonies. That was the classical mercantilism, and that is where the state and capitalism comes together. That is why was it called as classical mercantilism? Because the charters were given by the kings and queens back then, like the charter given by Queen Elizabeth in 1600 to the East India Company. Similarly, you also need to remember that neo-mercantilism today, like China's currency manipulation. Why is China manipulating its currency? For example, Chinese yuan has faced depreciation, which was highlighted by IMF in this month only, It was highlighted by IMF this month only, and China was able to make sure that it gets $1 trillion export surplus. Understood? So by this manipulation of currency, what China is doing is, it is actually depreciating its own currency. By depreciating its own currency, it is creating a cheap export ready market. Its whole economy depends on the exports. It takes these exports to the foreign nations and dumps them there, so that it earns what? Back bullion and dollar to its own currency, to its own economy. Similarly, what was done back due to in the colonial era, that we were forced by colonial powers to sell raw material outside and buy back finished goods. China is doing what? It is depreciating its own currency so that it sells its goods out and it earns back into the bullion. Understood? Or dollars. However, post this neo-mercantilism, recently in the Trump 1.0 and Trump 2.0, we have been witnessing or seeing that protectionism comes up. And that is why UPSC in 2024 means asked a question that how protectionism is causing impact, or what are the impacts of protectionism on economy. Understood? Protectionism and regionalism. What are the impacts of protectionism and regionalism on economy? High tariffs, bilateral pressure, weakening of WTO, tight immigration, pursuing trade surplus, and all the costs by America, so that to make America great again. That is something which is new to economics. Now, one more thing which you need to understand is behavioral economics. This behavioral economics was once again discussed in 2018 and 19 economic survey. What is behavioral economics or the nudge theory? It talks about that if you actually want people to do something, if you want people to purchase something, to pursue something. For example, if you want people to make toilets, you need to push them towards that. For example, right now, if you are sitting with a colleague, if you are sitting in a classroom, if you are sitting somewhere and you think that there is something which is more interesting and you want your colleague who is sitting right next to you, if you want him to look at something which is more interesting to you, you will nudge them by your this elbow that look, there is something else. There is something more interesting. Someone is stealing something. Someone is moving away. Someone is going somewhere. Look, it is there. You will nudge them. Definitely, like that nudge comes up, or the behavioral economics comes with that you need to incentivize people. You need to nudge their behavior. You need to ask them to do something. How? By giving them incentives. By telling them, for example, the incentives which were recently given under the employment incentive scheme, employment linked incentive scheme, or the production linked incentive scheme, that if you produce these goods, if you produce semiconductor chips, we will incentivize your sales. Every sale you will be rewarded. Every product you make, you will get rewards from government. That is how we want to grow the semiconductor industry. That is how this behavioral economics works. This behavioral economics concept was given by Richard Thaler. He in 2017 got a Nobel Prize also. He questioned the logical expectations in economics, showing how the nudges can influence the behavior without compulsion. In the classical economics, we used to talk about that producers and consumers will work according to their rationality. They will take decisions as per their rationality, but hereby they are taking decisions by what? By nudging their behavior. Understood? So this nudge theory was used in Swachh Bharat mission, asking people to keep their surroundings clean, to I would say construct the toilets and use the toilets. It was used in Jan Dhan Yojana, in which everyone was asked to open a bank account. It was used in COVID-19. You might have heard the voice of Amitabh Bachchan or Rajnikant or anyone influential telling you over the phone call that please go and get vaccinated. Vaccination is good for us. It will protect you. Please maintain a social distance of 6 feet in order to save yourself from COVID. That is behavioral economics. Understood? Lately, we also have developed and seen the lifestyle economics or lifestyle of environment. This was a campaign which India pursued during this G20 summit also. It was launched to ensure sustainable habits. It was there to nudge the behavior of people and not compel people. It says that we should make small shifts in our day-to-day behavior. For example, I will give you an example. Simple example is that if you have anything with you, say for example this pen. This is a simple example. If you have this pen and you are using these pens, now you are writing it, and once the ink of this pen gets over, it gets exhausted, what will you do with this pen? You will throw it into the dustbin. Now a small shift would be that you keep plastic waste separate, you keep organic waste separate. That will help the, I would say, waste management people to use or recycle the waste properly. If you take the metal, I would say, if you detach the metal from here, if you use this plastic or give this plastic to plastic waste vendors, or keep this plastic different, or I would say separate, and keep the metal separate, keep the, I would say, organic food or food waste or organic waste separate, or keep the dry and wet waste separate. That will help the waste management of the country. By making these small shifts, by at least adopting one plant every month, you are adopting at least 12 plants every year. You are growing 12 plants whole year. It costs around 50 to 100 rupees only to keep one plant at your balcony. That is how you will make greener India. That is how the smaller changes in the life will help you. I had a friend, he gave his interview back then in 2021 along with me only, and at that point of time my friend and I, we were eating a packet of chips, a packet of Lays. Once we completed that packet, he took all the pieces of plastic, he grabbed that paper and rolled it paper and made a small, I would say, knot of that paper, of that wrap, of the chips wrap. And how, I asked him, how will it help? He said that it will not create microplastics, and the plastic waste will be easy to segregate it from the rest of the waste, and it will go directly into the plastic waste vending machine, and it will get converted or recycled somewhere. That is how the thinking changes. That is what lifestyle economics talks about. Understood? Green economics is somehow similar to lifestyle economics. It is the holistic nature by which we can create sustainable, I would say, this planet can get sustainable, and how the sustainability can be ensured. This green economics concept was given by back then Malthus' warning. Malthus says that, the theory of Malthus which we read in the earlier, that population is growing by geometrical progression, while as food security is growing by in arithmetic progression. That is, there is more population and less food, and this scarcity of population, this was the first warning of Malthus, and he says that which leads to, this will lead to unsustainable planet. This will lead to degradation of environment. This will lead to destruction of our own planet. Second, in 1972, the Club of Rome reported the unsustainability, and in 1987, Brundtland Commission came up. It said that we have one common future, and this common future must be secured by all of us. We should decrease the release of greenhouse gases. We should, at current era, we should actually calculate the effects of environmental degradation. We should calculate new green GDP. We should calculate how much greener we are, how many forests are we creating. That is why at the Belém conference COP30 this year, it was discussed that we should create tropical forest fund. This fund should be created, and those countries who are keeping the forests alive, forest fund facility should be created, and these countries, those countries who are keeping their forests alive, safe and secure, they are helping in developing more forests, they are doing afforestation, those countries should be incentivized. Why? Because they are keeping those forests, and those are acting as the lungs of the globe. Understood? That is about the sustainability or sustainable economy. And this all was in the recent era, 2021. There was a committee known as Das Gupta Committee. He was Cambridge economist Partha Das Gupta, and he gave us a report about economics of biodiversity for UK government. He said that in the UK government, manufactured goods have doubled per capita. That the number of manufactured goods which we are producing, suppose, say, mobile phones, they have doubled, or the human capital has rose per capita just 17%, while as the natural capital has decreased per capita by 40%. That is how you should understand that biodiversity has been impacted by economy at this level. Understood? So, if you try to correlate this thing with the sustainability, with the green economics, with the green GDP, with the lifestyle mission, you will be able to understand that economics as a subject is not just about trading a good with 10 rupees, 20 rupees or 100 rupees. Economics in total is about production, consumption, distribution, but it brings along with it all the factors which are there involved in production, consumption and distribution. Whether that is environment, whether that is greenhouse gases, whether that is climate change, sea level rise, degradation of resources, natural resources, forests, green economy, leisure, human development, human capital, everything is summed up into the economics. That is why this economics is a multi-dimensional subject and you must understand it properly. That is where this economics becomes challenging for UPSC. And every student has that pain in his eyes that I am not able to understand the economy. That is why I come up, and that is why we have started this series of economy, so that we do what? We make the economy lucid enough for all of you. Understood? So at the last, I would refer to one of the critical aspects that you must remember, and it is the United Nations System of Environmental Economic Accounting, which is known as SRIRAM. Now this method talks about natural capital beyond GDP and policy guidelines. What is it? It simply talks about that every economy should calculate at least what is their natural capital, how many forests they have, lakes, rivers, glaciers, how much of that is yet to be calculated. How much carbon sequestration does their forests do? How much Miyawaki forests are they developing? How much greener areas are there in the economy? How much sustainable is their energy sector? Solar energy, nuclear energy, renewable energy. How much focus is on that sector and how are they moving away from fossil fuels? Now this talks about the natural capital of the country and it calculates all the natural capital of the economy. And that is United Nations System of Environmental Economic Accounting, and it was led by MOSPI, that is the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, India, and India became one of the 90 countries to adopt this method of calculating natural natural capital of the economy. Understood? Thereby we come to the summary of this lecture, the first lecture of the economy, and we discussed today that how economy deals in production, distribution under scarcity. We discussed about economic studies, rational choices, and to maximize well-being. We also discussed about growth, development, and development includes human welfare also. We discussed about trade-offs, opportunity cost, and policy decisions of the government. We showed up with the evolution of the discipline of this subject, wealth creation to welfare and sustainability. Everything from Adam Smith to sustainability, Brundtland Commission and SEEA was discussed in this lecture. For UPSC, you must ask yourself some of the questions. First question is, why did the barter system fail? What is scarcity? Differentiated goods and development. How is growth and development different? Explain the opportunity cost with examples. What are trade-offs? Economics as a decimal science. Why is it a decimal science? And explain Kuznets curve. What was Kuznets curve? Okay. Now remember that these are some of the keywords which you must remember for your economics, for your UPSC exam. once you remember these keywords, you can use them in your answer writing somewhere so that your classics or basics of economics gets reflected into your answers. Or I would say, for example, the way opportunity cost was asked in 2018, there can be a question on Kuznets curve, there can be a question on trade-offs, there can be a question on barter system. Now, we also discussed that at the current era, where and how does barter system currently play its role? Where are we using barter system currently? Today. With this, we conclude today's discussion. Today, we are studying the chapter 2 of this book. The title of the chapter is Measuring Economic Growth. The concepts and institutions behind measuring economic growth. As you might have seen in the index, that this book covers a lot of concepts in this chapter. Further, we will be going through all the concepts which are discussed in the book, and we will also understand why, how, and what comes with when we talk about economic growth. This concept is not just something which you might have seen in the books around. In this book, we will be going through in detail to the era of 1919, and then 1914, 1919, and then 1960s, 29, that how all changed in economics. What all changed in economics with the Great Depression? How the concept of circular economy came into picture, who developed GDP and who developed the methodology of GNP. Who were all those economists and why did they actually thought of calculating the aggregates of national income, macroeconomics. All of this will be discussed in today's chapter. I just want your patience. I want all of you to be patient enough, understand the concepts properly, and then I have promised this thing in the beginning of the series, that is, that you will be assured that you remember all the economics by heart. Understood? Now, let's start the concept. The first thing which this chapter talks about is basically measuring economic growth, understanding how economies grow, how they make wealth, and how they improve living standards. Understood? Now, next, this chapter begins with a simple introduction, that is the power of economic growth. It is not just that economy grows in numbers, but along with the economic growth, it brings prosperity for all of us. It brings wealth creation, it generates prosperity and opportunities for citizens. Economic growth brings job creation, it gets employment to all of us, tax revenues for government, fiscal dividends for infrastructure and welfare programs. The welfare programs which we see today around us, and it also helps in expanding the markets, building growth and building exports, building the surplus of RBI, developing Forex. Not only that, but whenever you go out, step out and start driving, you see the roads, infrastructure, the flyovers, the railway, airports, all of this comes along with the economic growth. And once the countries grow, once they become developed countries, their infrastructure, their education, their living standard, all of it gets improvised. That is the benefit of growth. Growth per se is a subset of development. And once we understood this, we need to understand that this growth dividend has been seen and government has witnessed. And let us know, in the rural housing, we launched the scheme known as Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana Gramin. In the urban areas or for the rural areas, the females who were cooking on the traditional fuels, they were given gas cylinders, new fuels, clean cooking fuels. For what? Because we had that much budget, we had that much money. That is why we are launching these schemes. Deen Dayal Gramin Jyoti or Upadhyay Gramin Jyoti Yojana, Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana for rural roads, Ayushman Bharat, health coverage for millions, Saubhagya of I would say rural or this universal household electrification. All of this is possible only because of what? Only because we had or we have had a good economic growth. Our GDP from menial numbers in the post-colonial era or in the starting of the independence has outgrown itself to billions and trillions. Now, if we understand this, our per capita income is nearly about 2 lakh rupees. If we understand this properly, it means that with the growth, we somehow, the growth itself is percolating through the roots of government, through the roots of the social goods which actually the invisible hand talked about. This growth is now percolating into the areas of development. It is helping people to get rural, people to get housing, to help them to get health insurance, medicine, electrification, clean fuel. That is the benefit of growth. Along with this, we also need to understand that this growth is not just about that we are seeing the positive side of it. This growth comes along with a negative side of it. That is why the role of the government comes to place. These schemes are there to understand that how to curb and how to manage the externalities which come along with growth. The externalities of growth are, for example, say that this growth brings the shadow side. What is the shadow side of growth? That is, it brings inequalities between rich and poor, which we discussed yesterday also in the first lecture. It brings poverty along with it, environmental degradation and pollution, mental stress and social pressures, which we all might have been seeing. Indian, or I would say our demographic dividend, the population in the working age from 15 to 64 years might have had a good experience of stress from job, health, family, society, because we are in the transition period of this development and growth. If you understand it well, you need to remember that this growth means actually production. What is production? Production is actually output, and economic production is essentially the value addition. Value addition means what? Whatever output does a person, I would say, generate. For example, say, I hereby am providing you what? I am providing you lectures of economy. This is a service. This is my output. This is what I am generating for the economy. And with my services, I am able to create some economic value into the society or into the GDP. Now, this economic value will be added to the final GDP, and this will make the final growth of the country. But tell me something, that if I wouldn't have been doing this economic lectures, or there might have been some other person who is not doing something academic in nature but is doing some crime, or he is doing money laundering, or he is doing drug smuggling, by that matter, do you think that the money somehow rotates through those cartels, through those organized criminal groups? Does that money also add to the GDP? Or I would say, the manual scavengers, or the people who are doing manual scavenging, or the people who are doing, I would say, they are segregating the waste, they are rag pickers, they are in the informal sector. Do you think that their contribution, their income generation is also calculated in the GDP? So now the point is that this output, the output which we are talking about, the economic production, which essentially is the output, this output has to be measured. This output can be in terms of goods or services, and this output is actually production, and this output leads to growth. That is why one of the methods of GDP is value added method, or we call it output method. Okay? Understood till this time? If you understand this, let's move further. How this production is done? This production is done by 4 factors of production. First is land, then is labor, then enterprise, and lastly it is capital. Capital, labor and land. These are the first basic things to start. I would give you an example. See, there was labor. It comes along with man himself, because once humans developed, they started doing labor. Even animals also do labor, but they are not selling the labor, they are doing it for themselves. One thing. Second, land. It was abundant when humans, I would say, evolved. Third, labor, land. Both the things were available. Capital somehow was not available. Capital we had to make. However, human made resources like machinery, building, infrastructure, technology, income and interest from money might have had not been there. But land and labor, the first two factors of production, were there. What was the enterprise into it? What was the entrepreneurial skill which was, I would say, used to first start production from land and labor? It was agriculture. Agriculture actually combined the factors land and labor along with capital of seeds or plants or saplings. Now, this started the production in agriculture. Similarly, it started the production in industry and then in services, and then commercialization of labor, commercialization of land. Everything started to get its economic value. Now, these factors of production, what are these factors of production? Land, labor, enterprise and capital, all of the four factors, they help us to produce goods into the market. We produce agricultural output from land by using seeds, by using human labor, by using tractor, machinery, by using today artificial intelligence, robots, cameras, sensors, pesticides, by using the services of cloud computing into agriculture only. That is what UPSC asked as a question in mains UPSC 2025. Understood that how technology can be integrated or AI can help us in agriculture. Now, if you understand this, you might be well aware that these four factors help us in developing what? In the production of goods and services. Land includes all the natural resources. Keep the definition with yourself. You need to remember the definition. Okay? Now, remember that land includes natural resources, minerals, water, forest, climate, fixed supply. Immobile, land has a fixed supply. It is very limited in nature. It has varied quality. Income from land is rent. Land generates rent as an income. Second, we have labor. Labor means human effort. Labor can be blue collared, white collar, pink collar, or the income from labor is wages. Capital, similarly, it is human made resources like machinery, buildings, infrastructure and all. Lastly, entrepreneurs, those who start business, those who start processing this thing, they are known as entrepreneurs. They utilize all the other three factors to produce more goods, to innovate, to take risk and to do business. Understood? Now, these four factors of production, the first of it is land. Land starts with the foundation, or land sets the foundation for the production. If there is no land, we cannot do without land. We cannot start production without land because it started the process of production. Land encompasses all the natural resources. Land has some limitations also. It has fixed supply. It has very limited, or it has I would say its origin is natural. The gift of nature, no human made, it is immobile, it cannot be moved from place to place. Varied qualities are there, like we have different, I would say, types of land, desert land, forest land, coastal land, and based on these types, the productivity of land also differs. Now there comes one more thing, which is the new thing, that is vertical farming or vertical expansion. Vertical expansion of what? Vertical expansion of buildings, of industries. There comes commercialization of space, where Google is planning project sun catcher. Now, if you remember this, or if you understand this, your eyes to new dimensions of economy will open up. Because land traditionally in the economic definition was this land. It was similar, or whether it was agricultural land, whether it was mountain, coast, or any type of land, whether it was the resources which were deep down inside the land, whether it was gold under your house, it was all included in the factor of land only. But tell me, where should we now keep vertical farming? On land only. Vertical expansion of industries, because industries are growing vertically. There is, I would say, service-based industry which works anywhere and everywhere remotely. Where do we keep that? Space commercialization. When we use space for commercial purposes, when the space is used by private companies and they use it for their commercial purposes, then where should we keep it? Tell me in the comment section. Huh? Now, second important factor of production is labor. This labor can be human element into the production, like blue collar laborers. They do what? They do manual labor. White collar laborers, they are salaried professionals and office managers. They manage offices. They are professionals. Second, pink collar, they are service positions, receptionists, retail clerks, salespersons. Most preferably they are females, and the preference for females has given it the name of pink collar jobs. Gold collar jobs, highly skilled professionals, doctors, lawyers, scientists, professors, they are known as gold collar jobs. Understood? So therefore, their output or their participation into the production defines their name. Now this labor, this can be of 15 to 64 years of age. It represents the potential labor supply of an economy, that how much labor we have currently which can be supplied into the production process of the economy, which will start producing. However, labor force are those laborers who are employed, either they are working or actively seeking work from their population, or actively seeking work. Workforce is actually employed and contributing to production. Workforce is that part which is employed already, but labor force includes both employed and seeking work, both of them. They are willing and want to work. Understood? So that is the definition between labor force and workforce. It was asked by UPSC in prelims once. So keep a note of this. The third important factor of production is capital. This capital ensures productivity. Why capital? Because the basic definition of capital itself is very simple. It says that capital is something which helps us to generate future stream of benefits. It is actually a productivity multiplier. What do we mean by this? Very simple. Productivity manager or productivity multiplier means that once you start investing into something, you invest into machinery, this machine will start generating for you. For example, you invested 1 lakh rupees into a tractor, you invested 1 lakh rupees into a laptop, not mobile phone, and you started creation of content from mobile phone or laptop. Now this will start income. It will get you income, or it will get you what? It will get you interest. Capital usually gets you interest. Now, if you understand this, that every capital invested, every rupee invested into capital will generate future stream of benefits like buildings, factories, machinery, equipment, infrastructure. Financial capital like money invested into stocks, bonds, credit facilities. Working capital like raw material, inventory, cash for day-to-day operations. Human capital like knowledge, skills, experience, health of workers. Intellectual capital like patents, which we usually file, trademarks, brands, research, organizational process. Social capital like networks, relationships, norms, cooperation. Social capital was asked by UPSC, that what do you mean by social capital? It was clearly asked by UPSC in its prelims exam. Now, if you understand this, I would like to move to the next part. It is very simple. Physical capital is actually whatever is tangible and you can see this. Financial capital is the money which you invest into instruments. Similarly, working capital is something which you use to process day-to-day operations of the business. Human capital is the knowledge, skills which you have right now. Understood? Last part or last factor of production is entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is the catalyst of all the production. Why catalyst? Capital is a multiplier and entrepreneurship is a catalyst. Now understand the two words properly. Some of the words are not mentioned in the book which I have used. Some of the stories are not mentioned in the book but I have used. Some of the examples are not mentioned in the book but I have used. This all is to make the book simple and make sure that you remember it by heart. That is the only objective here. So thereby, moving further, entrepreneurship, the catalyst, combines land, labor and capital. Now it uses all the three factors and then produces new things to earn profit. So therefore, every factor produces something or gives us output. Land gives us output as rent, labor gives us output as wages, capital gives us output as interest, and entrepreneurship gives us output as profit. Understood? Now these four factors generating the income, generating the value have to be remembered. Entrepreneurs thrive in economies where there is ease of doing business. Now do you remember that the free market economics, the pioneer of it, Adam Smith and Simon Kuznets, who said that free market economies should be there should be limited role of government. Why are they saying this? Because they want ease of doing business. They want no restrictions, no laws, no one to regulate the entrepreneurs, because they thrive, they develop, they grow, they generate profit, they make wealth only when there is least restrictions to them. Understood? Now, once you start production, once the business starts producing, both business and economy, both agriculture, services, manufacturing, GDP at large, country at large, macroeconomy, everything. Whenever a person starts producing, for example, whenever a person starts a job, if you start a job tomorrow, you will get a salary of 10-15,000 rupees or 20,000 or 30,000. With your experience growing, with your skills upskilling, with your knowledge getting more and more into the job, you will start getting promotions, better offers, and you will reach your peak of earning. And then at some point of time in life, you will retire from that. And then you will realize whatever the realized pension you have invested for yourself, whatever the term plans, whatever the investments or FDs you have created for yourself, now that will be your income, and that income will now digress. Understand that first you started low and then you grow and you reached a boom, and then this boom declined. But there is one more thing. An employee who once had a good employment opportunity, he was earning 1 lakh rupees, suddenly loses his unemployment, goes back to recession, or loses everything, loses his job, loses his income. Similarly, this manner or this cycle of growing, or I would say increasing of production and then declining of production, happens in businesses also and in economics also, of the larger country only, of any business unit, because this business unit somehow starts production, gets better on production, introduces new technology, new labor, new capital. But if a business faces losses, if it faces less demand in the market, its business will start declining. That is why economics, there is a rhythm in the business cycles of economy. First there is a boom, then there is slowdown, and then there is recession, and then there is boom. Now this rhythm in the business cycles, this continues. It is very simple. If you have read about climate change, most of the scientists, geoscientists, they talk about that climate change is phenomenon also. This natural phenomena occurs once in many centuries by itself, and that was back in Ice Age. And similarly, this might happen again naturally, not because of human or anthropological reasons. However, human and anthropological reasons have increased it. Do you remember in geography you have also read about the cycle of revolution of the earth? You have read about the currents in the ocean. You might have read about the cycles in the environment, sulfur cycle. Or you might have read about the oxygen cycle, the water cycle, back then in your 8th or 9th class. Water cycle, you might have read about water cycle properly. Now these cycles are there in every science. Similarly, economics as a science includes this cycle of boom and recession, or boom, slowdown, recession, and then back growth. Now this cycle is a rhythm in every business. Economic growth is cyclical in nature. It is between the altering periods of expansion and contraction. Now, economics or economists are trapped between these 2 points, that is the expansion and contraction. Expansion and contraction. I will give you a simple example. This year's Nobel Prize was given to 3 economists. Now, the crux of their theory was, for example, a simple example, forget everything, just understand this. This board in which I am teaching you is a digital board. Prior to this, we used whiteboards and markers, temporary markers. Prior to that, we were taught on blackboards and chalks. That was, I guess, around 20 or 30 years back. And then around 10 to 15 years back, we were using whiteboards, and now we are using digital boards. Have you seen the evolution? Have you seen the evolution of this board? Have you seen that the blackboard industry just vanished? The whiteboard industry just vanished or located itself to tier 2 cities where digital boards are yet to set their market. Now, whiteboards are not in tier 1 cities, whiteboards are there in tier 2 cities. Blackboards might be there back in rural areas because there is no concept of, there might be less concept of less market of whiteboards and markers. Therefore, you need to understand that the boom of blackboard industry was at some time when it was used at national level by everyone. Boom of whiteboard industry was when it was used by everyone. Boom of this digital board industry will be there. Then it will go to recession again. Maybe there might be another industry. Maybe there might be another new product and new innovation which will help us to get to this. Moving further, understanding business boom and recession. Boom is actually rapid growth and economies of scale, cheap supplies. Slowdown takes place when sales take time, there are slow sales, inflation increases, interest rates increase, and recession happens when there is negative growth. When the economy is growing negatively, it is not growing positively. What does that mean? Last year our economy grew by 6%. This year our economy is growing by 5.8%. But what if the economy is growing by -2%? That is recession. Understood? Now, what is actually recession? What is the clear definition of recession? It is when you have negative growth for consecutive 2 quarters. Recession in an economy means when the economy produces less than what it produced earlier. It is in recession and is also called as contraction or degrowth. Remember the term degrowth because this will be asked in prelims. Technical definition: 2 successive quarters where economic production is less than the same 2 quarters in the previous year or previous years in terms of value. The economic growth of these 2 quarters is less than the economic growth of past 2 quarters. Key indicators of recession, that is when can we say that an economy is in recession or is going in recession? When the investment and consumption are declining, employment levels are very high, capacity utilization is very low, and government's tax revenues have decreased significantly. Now, how to calculate it in numbers? Because economics also always talks in numbers only. The number is simple. Economy decreasing, or in India 2020 and 2021, our economy shrank by minus 23.9%. There was a growth of minus 23.9% in the era of 2020-2021. Economy contracted by 7.8%. Two successive quarters of degrowth constituted into recession. That was the recent most recession which India faced in the post-COVID era. Now, why does this happen? Why this recession happen? Because the slowdown in economy can happen. There can be slowdown in any economy. Say, for example, growth rate slows down but remains positive. As I said, for example, earlier we had a growth rate of 6% last year. This year we should have a growth rate of 7%. Or I would give you an example, very simple example. What does slowdown mean? For example, last year in 2020, 2021, 22, 23, 24, we had a growth rate of 7%, we have a growth rate of 6%, we have a growth rate of 5%. What does this mean? Are we slowing down? Otherwise, if we had a growth rate of 6%, 7%, 8%, what is the difference between two? In both the terms, in both these eras, from 2020 to 2022, we are growing, but here our growth rate is declining. The rate of growth is declining, the rate of growth is increasing, but we are growing. There is no negative growth in this. Here it is a slowdown of growth. That is, the growth rate slows down but remains positive. However, the production still increases compared to the previous periods. Understood? Production still increases. Production increased by 6%, production increased by 5%. Understand it properly. Recession is the absolute decline in production where two successive quarters produce less than the same quarters in the previous year. Understood? Very simple. India's recession from 2018 to 2021. This journey and this graph is thereby mentioned in your book itself, and it says in the quarter 1 of 2018 to 19, we witnessed a growth, a declining growth rate of from 7.1% to 3.1% in 2019-2020, last quarter. If you understand this, there is a significant slowdown in the economy. The economy is slowing down, and post the slowdown, this can either go up or can decline. Understood? And it declined to minus 24.4% in the quarter first of 2020-2021, and then it increased to minus 7% and then to 0.4%, and then the growth happened. However, this was somehow termed as V-shaped recovery, K-shaped recovery, or people called it J-shaped recovery. Now, we will be talking about that also later. But what are the causes of such recessions? Why do recessions happen? Because there was negative growth rate in the quarter 1 and this quarter also, quarter 1 to 2, minus 24%, minus 7.3%. That is why it was called as recession. This period was called as recession, that Indian economy entered into the time period of recession. Now, if you understand this, what are the causes of recession? Why economies go into recession? As I said, that economists work between the two things, that is the expansion and recession. They need to prevent the recession. They need to ensure that economy is expanding at a healthy rate. Understood? At a genuine rate, at a healthy rate. Second, what are the causes of recession? Causes of recession, first is financial crisis. Banking crisis or the asset bubbles which burst, bad loans, stock market crashes are the examples of this recession, or I would say financial crisis. Like, how does this happen? If there are too many NPAs in the balance sheets of banks, if banks carry bad loans, banks' balance sheets carry bad loans. At some point of time, the balance sheet will have more bad loans and it will be just having numbers on the papers, and there is no actual return of money from those who took the loan earlier. Similarly, bank crisis happens when a bank gives large loans which its capital cannot, I would say, which it cannot otherwise recapitalize. The loss, if happens, cannot be recapitalized by the bank itself. It means that the banking sector has failed. That particular bank has failed. You remember the Nirav Modi case. You remember the Kingfisher case. That cases like these created a crisis in the country, a crisis for the bank, and government had to intervene to, I would say, give the stimulus to the bank, to help the bank recover. And if that bank goes, I would say, if it happens that this bank fails, it means that people will lose their trust on the banking system. And if people lose their trust on the banking system, what will happen? That there is no investment into the economy. There is no savings into the economy. If there is no saving, there is no investment, there is no loan. And if people are not trusting into the financial institutions, there is less circular flow of economy. If the money is not flowing enough, it means that the production will slow down. Understood? There will be growth of third-party lenders. Now, that is something which we will be discussing later. But for now, you need to remember that financial crisis is not the only reason for recession. War and geopolitics like the Ukraine war, Gaza war also led to commodity prices rising, damaged the growth globally. Pandemic in 2020 caused a severe recession into the world economy. The effects of that recession are still being felt across the world. Trade shocks, somehow external trade disruption like the supply chain shock which was created in the post-COVID era also caused recession into the economy, was one of the reasons for recession. From recession, how an economy goes into depression. With the continuous recession, economy usually goes into Great Depression like it happened in 2008 and 9 due to the Lehman Brothers crisis. And GDP, if contracts by 10%, if the GDP of a country decreases by 10%, not the growth rate, but the GDP, remember, if the GDP contracts by 10%, suppose if a country had a GDP of $10,000 and its GDP in the next year is just $9,000. Now this is a decline of 10% of the GDP. It has contracted by 10%. Unemployment reaches 25%. If the unemployment rate in an economy reaches 25%, then it will be called as depression. That is a simple definition of depression. What is double depression? Double depression is very simple. If an economy once recovers and then goes back into the depression, that is known as double dip depression. How government responses to this recession and expansion? Government usually brings in fiscal stimulus, monetary stimulus and tax cuts. How fiscal stimulus is given into the economy? Government starts borrowing from outside, brings in money into its domestic currency and then supplies the money on infrastructure and welfare. If you want to understand these things at basic level, so along with this book, what you should do is you should refer to NCERTs. For that, what you need to do is you comment below. I will be giving you links. I will be giving you some more handouts which will help you to understand the basics of it, understand the stories of it. You need to remember that what is written in the NCERTs, and that will help you to understand the concepts in detail. Hereby we are covering the holistic book, and that is why it might be a little fast for you. Fiscal expansion, this will increase the government's borrowings and spendings on infrastructure and welfare, which somehow will help to supply money into the pockets of people. Those people will start spending that money into the economy, and once they spend money into the economy, it will create demand, and once the demand is created, it will start production. and then the production will fulfill the demand, and that is how the economy starts running back again. Tax cuts. It decreases the taxation to leave more money with people for spending. Why? Because if you have to pay 10% tax and government decreases this tax to 2%, it means you are now left with more money into your pocket. Otherwise, earlier you had just 90 rupees, now you have 98 rupees out of the 100 rupees to spend into the market. Now the excess 8 rupees will create more demand in the market. Monetary easing, central bank cuts its rates. Central bank provides less rate or less interest rate loans, and if the interest rate on loans is decreased, it will help the economy, it will help the people to get cheaper loans. Once they get cheaper loans, they can utilize those loans into the investment, they will start production, and which will in turn start supply into the market. Understood? Now, lastly, you need to remember that in 2020-2021, India or Indian government, to come out of recession, to bring economy out of recession, brought in the Atmanirbhar package. RBI did the monetary easing to revive the growth, and recession ended from quarter 3rd of 2020-2021. Understood? Remember that you need to keep a look on the snippets given in the book. These snippets talk about when the recession worsens, degrowth deepens with more job losses and even greater deflation. It is called Great Recession, which lasted in the world for some years after the Lehman crisis in 2008. Understood? With this, we come to a conclusion of today's lecture. But before we conclude, I just want to make sure that you remember this thing. The last discussion on this topic would be the base effect. Now remember, when we talk about growth or degrowth, we are actually comparing economy between the two eras. One is, for example, we are comparing economy from 2020 to 2025. That is simple. In 2020, our GDP was 100 rupees, and in 2025, our GDP is 150 rupees. Which means that we have made a jump of 50 rupees. 50 rupees jump from 2020 to 2025. That means our growth from 2020 to 2025 was 50%. That was the growth which we did from 2020 to 2025. Why did we actually compare the 2 years? And what is this year called as? This is known as base year. Now remember, if we choose a base year which is closer to the year in which we are, and why are we choosing a base year? Because you might understand, you might have read about percentage in your 10th class. Percentage is such a value which has to be derived from a base value. You cannot just say, I have got 90% in the exam. What 90% of what? 90% of total marks? Yes. 90% of what? 10% of what? 10% growth rate of what? 10% growth of what? 10% of what I had earlier. Or 10% growth rate means that comparing it with the base effect. That only gives you the statistical number of growth rate. Understood? That is why percentage has to be compared. Now base effect means the impact of previous year's data. That which year's data do you compare? If we compare our current economy with this minus 24.1%, it means our economy has massively jumped. Our economy has raised somehow, I guess, around 30% or 40% growth rate. But if we compare our economy to this level, 7.1%, our growth rate for the future for financial year 26 is around 6.8%. It was earlier projected, and IMF said that it would be 6.5%. Now, are we on a slowing growth rate, or are we on a increasing growth rate? Now, that is the effect of base rate or base year. Therefore, this base year is the comparison between current data and the previous year's data. It is crucial for accurately interpreting inflation and GDP figures. If we understand, if you might have had a conversation with your father or your parents, they would have told you that in our era, we used to buy flour or we used to buy, I would say, wheat of rupees 1 or 1 rupees per kg. You might have heard these things, that in our era, this pen was worth only 2 rupees. In our era, pencil was just rupees 1. But that same pencil is costing us today 10 rupees. That same pencil or that same pen is costing us today 20 rupees, 50 rupees, 100 rupees. The mobile phones are costing us more. The desktops, gadgets, books, I would say, were cheaper. Clothes were cheaper back then. Why so? Because money back then had more purchasing value than today. Base effect, if we talk about inflation, if I will say you simply, if this watch before or 10 years ago or 20 years ago was worth 100 rupees, this is today worth 3,000 rupees. Does that mean that this watch or the inflation rate has massively jumped to 300% or 3,000% or 200%? No, that is not the reason. We have to compare our current prices and our current GDP to a year which has been stable, near, and a year with positive financial growth, a year with less instability, a year with less, I would say, boom or recession, a year with moderate growth, a year not in boom or not in recession. Understood? That is why this base year effect is important. And if we take a low base, if the last year had exceptionally low inflation or GDP, even the modest increase this year will appear as a high percentage of growth. That is why we are still comparing our data to 2011-12 in terms of CPI inflation. That is why we are comparing our data back to earlier eras when there was stability in the economy. Understood? Now, moving further, why should we measure economic growth and how did the birth of economic measurement happen? Who all were the concepts or who all were the economists, like Keynes, who was the economists who wrote Freakonomics, Stephen D. Levitt, who were the authors of post-depression economic theories, who were the authors like Simon Kuznets, who developed the concepts of GDP and GNP, and what GDP, GNP is actually. All of this will be discussed in tomorrow's lecture. The next lecture on this topic, we will discuss what is GDP, how GDP is calculated, what are different methods of GDP, what is GNP, how it is calculated, who produced it, who developed the methodology, what are the current numbers of Indian economy in terms of GDP and GNP. This all will be discussed in the next lecture. In the last lecture, we discussed about all what was there necessary for understanding economic growth. What economic growth means is that, I would say rather, that there was a consensus. As we continue the story, there was a consensus among economists that we should understand that all the economies should grow slightly and we all should maintain a growth rate, a positive growth rate. You might have heard that India, in the past times, we yesterday discussed also this thing, that in the past India witnessed a growth rate of minus 24% in the COVID era. Or we also witnessed this thing that this growth rate from 7.1% declined to 24.3% with a consistent decline. Now, once we understand this, we also need to understand that why to maintain this growth rate. And in order to maintain this growth rate, what is needed is to measure the growth. And once we start measuring the growth, we discuss the concept of base effect, that from where to measure the growth and where to compare it, with which year should we compare it, and that is what base year actually means, base effect actually means. So thereby, in economic growth, we will discuss today why should we measure economic growth and how did this lead to birth of the economic measurement. Basically, we conclude yesterday's discussion today, that is, in order to assess the adequacy of the economy, in order to understand that how our economy is that economy actually adequate enough to contain all the people, all the human demography or all the other resources, to utilize all the resources for production and consumption, to maintain domestic demand and to ensure that foreign goods are imported and exported, and goods are exported to foreign, but not disturbing or distorting the domestic economy. Now, once we understand all of this, we also need to remember that this growth also shows us that what is about to come in the future. What is the forecast of revenues? How much tax collection will be there in financial year 26 next year? How much GST collection will be next year? That is why we need to understand growth. We need to understand that this also prevents the imbalances. That is, if we understand that automobile sector is going to change and conventional engines are going to change and we are shifting to BS6, we are shifting to cleaner energy, we are shifting to electric vehicles, it means that those vehicles which were made earlier, those industries are going to shut. Similarly, that example which I gave you yesterday was about blackboard, whiteboard and digital board. We need to understand that there would be inflation or deflation in some sectors and deflation in some sectors. We need to prevent that. We need to protect those industries far ahead. We need to understand that these industries need to innovate and move to newer products. They cannot stick to the older fashion. Similarly, this also balances the sectors. This steers growth direction across agriculture, manufacturing and service sector. Suppose India, at the time of independence, we had a contribution of agricultural sector around 50% or more than that in the total GDP of the country at some point of time. But today, our agriculture is contributing around 18% to the GDP. Still, if you remember that in the independence era or in the post-independence era, or I would say in 1950s, 1947, 1940s and 1950s, agriculture was contributing around 90% of the employment. But today it is around 45% of the employment. 45% of the people for their livelihood are directly or indirectly, I would say, dependent on agriculture. Thereby, once these sectors are changing the dimensions, the dynamics are changing, we need to understand that which sector is growing and which sector is not growing. That is the subject matter of mesoeconomics, which we read yesterday. Further, this targets the employment, that if India is facing 6.6% employment, 10% unemployment, 2% unemployment or 3% unemployment, where should we actually focus? Recently, there happened a case in USA where USA was facing with stagflation, and that stagflation had to be covered. That is why USA 10 or US Federal Reserve started to decrease its policy rate, because the unemployment rate in USA was around 6%. And that is why it decreased its policy rate by 25 basis points. So thereby injecting more dollar into its economy so that there is more employment to be created in the economy. That is how we need to understand that wherever there is employment, wherever there is unemployment, we need to focus on those sectors. That is why we need to understand that growth has to be measured. Now, once we understand that growth has to be measured and we need to measure it, how and why did this happen? That we all need to understand this. That how growth actually was measured. What was the birth of growth, economic measurement? You might have seen this paragraph in the book. If you read the book along with me, you will see this paragraph. And this paragraph talks about that in the beginning, the US Great Depression of 1929 and 39 could be ended only when the data was available. This depression was ended only when we had data. At that time, Simon Kuznets, an economist about whom we have seen in the first chapter, gave the notion of national income in 1930s to capture the economic production. He developed the methods of GDP and GNP. The rules and methods which are used to collect the measurement or measure the economic growth data are known as national income accounting. Understood? So this paragraph talks about that in 1929 we had a Great Depression in USA. We collected all the data. Simon Kuznets developed a method of GDP and GNP calculation. And that calculation method or the whole exercise which he does is known as national income accounting. But this paragraph is somehow, I would say, devoid of the story. Rather, I would like to tell you the story. 1929, before 1929, there happened to be World War I. And post World War I, some economists happened to start criticizing the Treaty of Versailles. The Treaty of Versailles, which was signed after World War I. These economists, like Keynes, he argues that Treaty of Versailles, actually the treaty which was signed for the peace of world, was actually harsh enough on Germany, and the territorial penalties which were imposed on Germany actually destabilized economy, destabilized the Europe. So thereby he said that he gave us a warning. A warning was that he predicted there will be excessive financial burden and this will lead to economic collapse, inflation, unemployment and social unrest. And his prophecy came true. He said that we need to understand that there should be economic justice, reconstruction over the punishment of last instability, and that was the perspective of John Maynard Keynes in 1919, when he talked about the Treaty of Versailles after World War I. So he said that instead of establishing political peace, we need to establish economic peace. We need to establish redevelopment, because otherwise there will be massive instability in the world. And that is what happened, and which later on led to what? World War II. But before that there came other economists. Like there was an economist named Stephen D. Levitt. What he says, he is also known as Indiana Jones of economics. He gives us the applied economics, and he says that we need to apply reasoning. We need to apply the principles of economics as a tool to understand the real world problems. He says that we need to understand the behavior, we need to understand markets and money. Not only do we need to consider ourselves in economics with the market and money, rather we also need to understand that how parenting is done, how drug smuggling is done in the total market, how markets actually are functioning. So thereby he talks about the incentives. Stephen D. Levitt says that if you want your people, if you want your economy to work in a particular manner, for example, I will give you a simple example. These devices in current day are most important devices. Not only mobile phones, but the camera on which I am recording, the camera through which you are viewing me, the display which you are using in your phone to watch this video, the display on which I am writing. These all technologies are important. That is why we need to produce these technologies more. We need to produce these displays more. That is why we introduced a production-linked incentive scheme. If you produce such goods, we will incentivize your sales. That is why Stephen Levitt says, he says that economic, social and morals, they drive human behavior. Data analysis can overturn the popular beliefs. He says that it is not just the earlier concept that producers and consumers will act rationally. Rather, we also need to incentivize whatever we want to do, and we need to nudge the behavior of people. That was Stephen D. Levitt. Then came the Great Depression. The Great Depression of 1929 to 1939 in USA, it brought along with it, and policymakers witnessed that there is an economic crisis, and this economic crisis cannot be diagnosed, corrected without we have data of the economy. And once we get data, then only we can correct that where should we actually focus. Should we focus on our national population so that they get skills and they go outside of USA and they earn there and then bring back the profit, send the remittances back? Or should we do something else? Should we focus on our local currency, supply this currency to the world, establish supply chains, establish production lines, factories, MNCs across the world, and those MNCs in the world will earn profit and they will send the profit back to US economy? Are you understanding? So similarly, if you remember that it is the same scenario which East India Company used. East India Company thought of this thing, that what we will do is, we will go and trade with the world. We will bring cheaper goods from outside the world and we will bring them to European market and sell them in the European market and we will start earning. Then they thought, no, we have industries back at home. What should we do? We will bring raw material from outside, we will make the finished goods and now we will sell them back into the market. Then came one more thought, that no, let us do one more thing. We will use that cheap labor also which is lying over there in the third world. We will go establish factories in the third world. We will produce there using cheap labor, cheap raw material and cheap taxation. Then we will sell those products in that market, bring the only profit home. Now, this whole data or this whole policy analysis only because of data. So in the Great Depression, there was data analysis of income, employment and consumption. And if you see today also we are doing the same thing. We are analyzing that how much income do we have by calculating the income method of GDP. We are analyzing how much employment we have by periodic labor force survey. We are analyzing consumption in the economy by utilizing the household consumption surveys. These surveys are being done today. And the surveys were developed, or not these surveys, but the method of data analysis was developed back then after this, I would say, economic depression of 1929. If you understand this, now remember that Simon Kuznets, who was the pioneer of national income, he developed this method in 1930s in which he said that we should measure national income and we should utilize this national income as a tool of economic activity around the nation. We should develop, or he developed himself, the gross domestic product, created GNP, enabled the quantification of economic growth, facilitated the policy design which was based on the measurable outcomes. Now, if you understand this, you also need to remember that national income accounting, which was developed by Simon Kuznets, has different features. What are these features? It measures the economic activity, that is the total value of all the goods and services which are produced in an economy. Suppose my economy is currently producing 4 goods, one this pencil, second this mouse, third this phone and this remote. Understood? Now, what is the market value of these goods? This pencil costs me 1000 rupees. Mouse costs me 500 rupees. This remote costs me another 500 rupees. And lastly, this phone costs me 2000 rupees. Now, add this up, that is 2000, 2000, 4000 rupees. This is my GDP, because that is the final value of goods and services produced within a country, if I have this much only. Thereby, we also need to remember that this data is used for comparative analysis. We use this data for comparative analysis across periods, across years and across economies. We compare it with the last year, we compare it with the last decade, we compare it with the another country. It helps us to design the policies, whether it is fiscal policy or monetary policy. We should see that how people are making wealth. If there is too much of wealth residing in some section, we can impose wealth tax. If there is a large section of population which is earning 12 lakh rupees income or less than 12 lakh rupees income, we can do one thing. We can ensure that less than 12 lakhs we are not imposing any direct tax. So similarly, these all things are because of the measurement, of economy. Now this measurement of economy, what all should it cover? That was GDP and GNP by Simon Kuznets. But before we move ahead, there was one more method which was developed by this William Phillips. Now this is not mentioned in your book. It is something which I have included into the book just to make sure that you understand the concepts properly. Alban William Phillips, what he did was he developed a machine. He developed a machine to show us that all of this macroeconomy, all of the macroeconomic data, all of the macroeconomy is flowing across different sectors. he made this machine which you are seeing over here. It is lying in a museum back there in London, and what he did was, in this machine, he showed us that this colored water, which is in different tanks, this colored water will start moving. For example, if you move labor from a household, which is, for example, you who is sitting in his home, if you move yourself and go and find an employment in a firm, now this transaction will move money from firm to labor. Understood? So thereby services are going in this way. Further, this firm will also produce goods. These goods will be sold to market and they will be purchased by, for example, this was A, they will be purchased by B, but B itself will pay what? Rupees to the firm back. This firm will also pay tax to the government. Understood? And government will spend this tax money through subsidies into the public or on the infrastructure. And once they spend this money on the infrastructure, maybe they are making roads. These roads, once made, will decrease the transportation cost. Transportation cost of this firm. Whatever the goods the firm is selling into the market, that goods price will be decreased. So thereby it's a whole circular flow of economy, or circular flow of money, circular flow of income, which is circulating across the economy. Not only in the domestic economy, but these firms may somehow start doing import and export. We will be reading today the circular flow of money. We will be reading today the circular flow of income in this economy lecture only, and thereby you will understand all the 5 basic models of circular flow. Understood? So this Alban William Phillips, he thought that there should be a better way to understand the economics. So he developed the interconnections beyond numbers, and he developed this machine known as MONIAC to mention or to suggest that how national income analog computer was born, and this national income analog computer was this MONIAC machine. Understood? Now that is the hydraulic economy, and this all of these tanks which were used by this MONIAC machine, all of these tanks, they were marked as government spendings, taxation, investment, savings and consumption and national income. And that is how he showed us that in this tank which is connected in the bottom, how government or how the national income will be created by all of the transactions which are going around through consumption, through government spending, through taxation, through savings and investments. So he showed us all of this through all of these transactions. Now I will be showing you all of this, that how actually the national income is created. This MONIAC machine created a revolutionary impact, and it was the first simulation of this machine, or first simulation of national economy, first simulation of national economy in terms of what? In terms of a machine or an analog computer. And that was how the circular flow of income was developed. Understood? So thereby setting a legacy to science, that economics is to be developed as a science also, but that is something which you do not have to deal with in general studies. That is something which we deal in optional. So leaving that aside, now we will again begin with the birth of GDP, which was developed by Adam Smith, Simon Kuznets. Simon Kuznets developed the concept of GDP, and he said that in the Great Depression era, US economy, in order to come out of the depression, the Great Depression of 1929, we need data and we need data analysis. Later he received Nobel Prize in Economics for his contributions. Now, what is GDP? GDP represents the final value of goods and services produced within a country's borders in a specific period. Typically, a year GDP growth rate is crucial indicator of economic performance, reflecting health, growth and development. Now, this is basic understanding or basic definition of GDP. But what actually GDP is? GDP is gross domestic product. Understood? So, what is gross domestic product? If you see, gross includes the amount of that we does not deduct the amount of depreciation. Gross mein there is no deduction of depreciation. What is domestic? Domestic deals with territory. Territory means all the political borders, all what is produced in the political borders, all what is produced in the sovereign territory, all what is produced in the I would say exclusive economic zones, embassies of India or refineries in the oceans or Indian refineries in the oceans. Now, all of this leads to GDP or the territory of GDP. Product can be both goods and services, both of them, not only goods but goods and services both. So, that is GDP. Now, types of GDP. GDP is usually defined as nominal GDP and real GDP. So, what is the difference between nominal GDP and real GDP? Real GDP equals to nominal, or I would say that real GDP is actually the GDP at constant prices, and nominal GDP is actually the GDP at current prices. Understood? So, thereby current prices are, there is no deduction of inflation. That is, rather I would suggest that real GDP equals to nominal GDP minus inflation. Understood? So, thereby you need to understand that this is the difference between nominal GDP and real GDP, which is mentioned in the book also. GDP per capita means that how much production is being done by every person. So, for example, if in total our GDP of the nation is rupees 1 lakh and our total population, this is production, and our total population is in total 1000 people are there living in India. So, thereby per capita income would be 1 lakh divided by 1000. So, thereby our GDP or per capita GDP will be 100 rupees. Understood? But this does not mean that everyone has an income or everyone is producing an output of 100 rupees. Some of it may be unemployed, some of the population, or I would say some sections of the population will be dependent on the others who are producing more. There will be dependent population also, there will be self-employed people also. Some people will be earning more than 100, some people will be earning not at all. That is where the limitations of per capita GDP comes in place. Lastly, we also need to understand what is GDP growth rate. GDP growth rate means that when we compare the growth which we had in this year comparatively to the last year or last to last year or last to last to last year. So, thereby when we calculate that how much growth are we having year on year, that is GDP growth rate. So GDP growth is different. GDP growth, for example, would be that in some of the years, I would say 2020, 2021, 22, 23, we had a GDP of 1 lakh rupees. We had a GDP of 2 lakhs. We had a GDP of 2.5 lakhs. We had a GDP of 2.2 lakhs. Now understand, did our GDP grow, or is our GDP growing, or what is our GDP growth rate? If we compare to this, or if we compare these 2 years, there is a growth of 100%. But if we compare to these 2 years, there might be a growth of 25%. Understood? So now, GDP calculation methods. How is GDP calculated? GDP is calculated in such a manner that we have 3 methods to calculate GDP. First is income method, second is expenditure method, and third one is production method. Now remember that in your book there is actually a section where you will see that after this slide, the birth of GDP, you will directly find that GDP versus GNP, and you will also find the different concepts in different manner. But hereby I am first clearing your concepts, and then we will start again the sequence of the book. So you just need to understand that we are somehow shuffling the book around, and we are value adding the book. So thereby GDP calculation method, or GDP calculation method, first is income method. It measures all the income which is earned by labor and capital. That is, hereby GDP equals to GDP at factor cost plus taxes minus subsidies. So GDP as per income method equals to GDP at factor cost plus net indirect taxes. Understood? So it means that all the income which is earned by whom? Factors of production. All the income earned by factors of production. What are factors of production? Land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship. So what would be the income which they will earn? So the income which is earned would be, land will be creating rent, labor will be creating wages, capital will be creating interest, entrepreneurship will be creating profit. So thereby all of these 4 once calculated together will cost to us what? Will give us the income method. Understood? Now expenditure method means that whatever spendings are there in the government, now whatever spendings are there in the economy, now who will spend in the economy? All those people who are earning will spend the money. For example, if I am earning a lakh a month or 10 lakh a month, I will spend this money. Where should I spend this money? Either I will save it, I will invest it, understood? I will utilize it for my daily expenses, or I will purchase a vehicle, I will purchase something, but eventually I will spend this money. This money either will be spent through government, through private, or exports and imports. That is why we need to calculate both how much I earned and how much I spent, so that both the numbers of earning or the number of production, because once I started producing, I gave my services to a company, that company showed that we had a total growth of 10 lakh rupees. Why? Because this person started giving services, and due to which we produced the services of 10 lakh rupees. Understood? So that is the output of that company where I am working, that this company is producing around 10 lakh rupees as an output. Now we also need to see that how much investment or how much consumption is there in market. Is total 10 lakh rupees consumed from the market or not? Is it spent into the market or not? Is there actually income and expenditure, are they actually equal or not? So thereby expenditure method shows us what? First, that GDP equals to consumption by all the households and people, investment, whether that is the private investment, consumption by government, exports, minus imports. So thereby we will see in GDP or expenditure method GDP, we will be explaining it again because there will be tomorrow one more lecture on national income accounting, and then we are done with this chapter. So national income accounting, in that we will again revisit all the three of these methods, that how national income accounting goes on, what are these methods. Production method actually talks about all the commodities and services in the market price, that is value of all the commodities. Whatever the commodities are produced, what is their value in the market, that is it includes or it shows us the real GDP to prevent the price level distortions. Production method witnesses or calculates the market value of all the commodities which are produced in the market, while as income method talks about the factor cost. Understood? Now, what is tax to GDP ratio? Tax to GDP ratio talks about that how much revenue of I would say tax have we calculated and how much GDP growth is there. For example, in India, we had I would say the tax revenue in total of GDP was around 11.7%, and it was projected to be the tax to GDP ratio for financial year 2024-2025. Previous year it was 11.6%. Now understand, why am I discussing it here? Because if we have low tax to GDP ratio, or I would rather say that our GDP is growing and our tax money is not growing, then there is a problem. Why so? Because we might be growing in such a manner which is not benefiting or which is not contributing towards government. Why? There might be parallel economy, there might be black money, there might be corruption in the economy, there might be tax evasion in the economy. And if there is tax evasion in the economy, it is just a simple example that you need to understand how much important is data in an economy. So thereby, if we understand that last year we collected this much data, this much tax, 11.6%, and this year we are calculating or collecting 11.7% tax. This shows us that if GDP has also, I would say inflated in the same ratio, if the growth of GDP is in the same ratio, then it is okay. If it is not, then we need to look in that where is this growth actually happening? Is there tax evasion or not? That is why we need to cross check through income method, expenditure method and production method. Through income method, expenditure method and value addition method. That how actually is GDP producing and how actually are we calculating GDP. Why are we using three different methods? In order to cross check that the numbers are equal, in order to understand that there is no market distortions, in order to understand that the data from all the three methods is equal. But yes, there have been, I would say, there have been discrepancies in the data, and lately it was cleared by the government also that yes, the numbers across the three, I would say, methods of GDP do have some differences. Why does this happen, that there are differences? Because we usually use, for example, for GVA, gross value addition, for gross value addition at basic price, this data might be, we are providing this data quarterly, but once we discuss the GDP at market price, we take that for the whole year. And the data collection surveys also depend that how much sample survey are we calculating, how much data are we including, and that is what led to the revision of GDP. Lately in 2015, we revised our methodology to calculate GDP. Why do we do this? Because we need to understand that when we are calculating or when we are collecting the data of the GDP or data of the economy, as it was mentioned in 1929 Great Depression, that we must have data to come out of the depression, and if we do not have data, we won't be coming out of the depression. Understood? So thereby we must have revised, updated and most accurate data. That is why we actually did what? We revised the GDP methodology. How to do this? in 2015. Before 2015, our base year for calculating all the prices and GDP growth rate was 2004 and 5, and we revised it to 11-12. Manufacturing data was taken from Index of Industrial Production and an annual survey of industries. It had only 2 lakh factories in it. 2 lakh factories, the data of 2 lakh factories was to be collected. But after that, post 2015, we made a database which was made by the Ministry of Corporate Affairs. It is known as MCA21 database. This includes data of around 5 lakh companies. And not only do we take the survey based data, rather we are taking the ITR, income tax returns which are filed. We are taking the data from that, which is the most accurate data. Earlier we used to calculate GDP at factor cost. Now we are calculating GDP at market price and GVA at basic price. In the financial sector, this financial sector was limited to mutual funds only. That is, we were collecting data, or we were collecting the income generated by mutual funds only. We were not collecting all the other sectors. Now we include all stockbrokers, SEBI, PFRDA and IRDAI. Understood? Lastly, agricultural value. In agricultural value, only the farmers, the production done by farmers was calculated. But now we updated it to include livestock and allied activities also. Understood? So thereby setting the key macroeconomic variables, what we are using currently is GDP at factor cost, which I told you earlier also. That is market price minus net indirect taxes. Factor cost is GDP at factor cost minus depreciation. That is the NDP, net domestic product. GDP at factor cost is market price minus net indirect taxes. GNP at factor cost is, okay, we will be visiting GNP separately. So you just need to remember GDP and NDP. So thereby remember that GDP and NDP, this is gross domestic product and this is net domestic product. In order to move from gross to net, we decrease the depreciation, minus depreciation, and rest is domestic product and domestic product. But yes, if it is GDP at factor cost, so thereby what we will do is GDP at market price minus or inflation equals to GDP at factor cost. If you see, it is written over here. Understood? GDP at market price minus net indirect taxes is GDP at factor cost. Understood? Now, also need to understand that sectoral contributions of GDP, agriculture, industry and services. Industry is secondary sector and agriculture is primary sector and the services are tertiary sector. Now, different sectors have different contributions or provide, or I would say, if you talk about primary sector or agriculture sector, it is contributing around 17 to 18% into the economy. And that is which similarly goes to industrial sector and service sector also. And this is the subject matter of mesoeconomics. What is the significance of GDP? Why is GDP important? Because it gives us economic health, long-term trends and stakeholder applications. Now these are some of the points which you should remember for your mains, not for your prelims. Understood? We will revise the concepts of GDP and GNP. Once we are done with the concept, we will revise it back so that we remember it for prelims. Understood? What are the limitations of GDP? Why it is not a good factor of what calculation? First, it does not include informal sector. It does not account for the household production, volunteer work, underground markets and leisure time. It has geographical gaps because foreign companies who are profiting hereby, their profit is taken out, is considered as a national output. It is well being overlooked. It does not look for the human development, rather it is focused for growth only. Costs and benefits, Unproductive expenditure like administrative costs, wasteful investment is counted as growth. Understood? So thereby you need to remember that GDP does not or has been criticized that it is not the best form of, or it is not the best tool to measure the economic growth. Rather, also should remember that by calculating GDP, we have multiple measures to calculate the national income. We have multiple measures to calculate national income. GDP comes in various forms like nominal GDP, which is based on the current prices. Real GDP is based on the constant prices. Per capita income means GDP divided by population. And purchasing power parity. Okay, purchasing power parity is something which we will deal later. Further, there are three methods to calculate GDP: income method, expenditure method, and production method. These give us different perspectives of economic activity. It is a critical or I would say critical indicator to assess the economic health and guide the policy of government, whether that is monetary policy or the fiscal policy. Understood? Now, let's move to GNP. So, what is gross national product? Gross national product, understanding the total economic value created by the nation's residents, wherever they are located in India or abroad. Indians wherever they are located, whether they are located in India or whether they are located outside, whatever they are creating. For example, if there is an Indian company and it started its branch in UK, for example, Jaguar, and it is producing in UK, it will be calculated in India's GNP, but it won't be calculated in India's GDP. Okay? Not in GDP. Understood? So thereby understand this thing. If there is a person, for example, John, he is a citizen of USA and he is working in US Embassy, which is located in India. Understood? So his income or his salary is, for example, $1 lakh. His salary will be calculated in the GDP of USA. And in this Indian embassy, if there is a person who belongs to Japan, another person, his name is Wang Yi. Now he belongs to Japan. His income is around $50,000. His income will be calculated in the GDP of USA, but GNP of Japan. Understood? Similarly, if there is a person here, an Indian person, Sharan, this Sharan is earning, I would say in rupees or dollars also, $75,000 in US Embassy, which is located in India. It won't be calculated in our GDP, rather it will be calculated in our GNP. Understood? So that is the difference between GDP and GNP. GNP is the measure of total monetary value of goods and services which is produced by a country's residents. Regardless of the location wherever they are. It captures both domestic and international economic contributions, offering a holistic view of economic activity. Understood? So GNP equals to GDP. GNP equals to GDP plus net income from abroad. NFIA, net income from abroad. Net factor income from abroad. So now what does this mean? That is the income generated by Indians from abroad minus income generated by foreigners from India. That is why it is known as net factor income from abroad. Understood? Net income from abroad is the difference between income earned by residents of foreign activities and the payments made to foreign residents working domestically. Understood? That is simple. Now calculating GNP, how to calculate GNP? It is dependent on, or GNP considers only the final goods and services to avoid double counting and intermediate products. It talks about consumption, investment, government, net exports and imports, and net factor income from abroad. That is this part from consumption to net exports. This is GDP only minus net factor income from abroad. Understood? Or plus net factor income from abroad. GDP plus net factor income from abroad. Understood? Plus. Agar net factor income from abroad hoga, then it will be plus. Now, why GNP matters? Why to calculate GNP? First, it gives us a comprehensive assessment. It captures both domestic and international economic activity by providing broader perspective than GDP alone. It gives us the trade relation insights, that to which country or from where are we earning more remittances, are we investing more in which country, which country is to be or the favorite destination of India's FDI, or from where India is getting more FDI. For example, till now we have the top 2 FDI partners, that is Singapore and Mauritius. Next, global comparison. It allows us to understand that globally how much India is focusing. This also helps policy makers to leverage the GNP data so that they craft effective economic strategies and develop plans like trade policy, किस country के साथ किस goods में trade करना है, कहाँ पे investment करनी है और किस country का tax structure कैसा है, investment decisions किस country के लिए लेने हैं और developmental programs किन कंट्रीज के साथ MOU साइन करने हैं, किन कंट्रीज के साथ फ्री ट्रेड एग्रीमेंट साइन करने हैं, किन कंट्रीज के साथ हमें बायलैटरल पार्टनरशिप एग्रीमेंट साइन करना है या स्ट्रेटेजिक पार्टनरशिप एग्रीमेंट साइन करना है. दिस ऑल हैज टू बी डिस्कस्ड, और दिस ऑल is I would say discussed only basis, the only basis for all of this is that how much effectively are we in good relations with that country, how much strategically important is that country. Now strategic importance is defined by what? By defense, politics, economics, trade, bilateral relations, or I would say soft power, I would say diaspora, I would say economic links between the two countries. Understood? So that is why if the global economy is more and more integrated, it means that it is less likely to go for another world war. Understood? Chalo. Now this statement you will recall it later on when you write essays. What are the challenges in measuring gross national product? First, data calculation or data collection accuracy has to be maintained because it is difficult as the economy or the global economy is I would say too much integrated, and it is difficult for us to calculate the data. You might have heard of Hawala transactions, you might have heard of the routes which are not used. For example, we usually have a SWIFT mechanism for intercountry payments. We usually do remittances. But people who are earning, for example, a person who is just earning $1,000 a month in US or somewhere else, now he wants to send $800 or $500 or $200 home every month, and he has to pay $10 as a fees for sending this remittance back home. So what they do is they do not use the conventional routes, they do not use the formal routes. What they usually do is they have a network which is running parallelly. And for example, in US, a person named again John, he collects $10,000 from 100 Indians who are earning in USA. He collects it and he calls his friend. His name is Karan, who is sitting in India. he asks Karan that distribute this $10,000 while you first convert the $10,000 in rupees and then distribute it in the 100 families of these Indians, and all the people will go, they will show the receipt which they have provided them, whether through printed format or something else. They have a code. You might have seen it in movies that okay, I have half of the note, you have half of the note, just match the note, and then if the number matches, okay, we will transact the briefcases, or we will transact the money. So the drug dealers do this thing, and that is how Hawala works, and that is how these payments are being done. Now that is one thing which creates a problem in data collection. Currency fluctuation also is there. Sometimes so dollar goes to 90 mark, okay, 90 rupees equals to $1, which creates problems. And at this time, all the people who are living outside, they will try to send more and more dollars into India. Why? Because their family is getting more and more rupees out of $1. And sometimes if the dollar falls to back 60 rupees, $1, maybe at that time these remittances will change. So thereby it will change the number. Earlier we had 30 rupees extra on every dollar remitted to India, which means that our GNP might inflate, and now it may not. Now, globalization complexity. National or multinational companies, what they do is, you will see an example of Ireland. Global or multinational companies, what they do is, they tend to generate or they tend to produce everywhere. As I gave you the story that Britain from colonial era and then industrial era and then USA. Now these multinational companies which you are seeing, for example Facebook, for example McD, KFC, or the Subway, or any of the Walmart, all of these multinational companies, what they are doing is, they basically set up their corporate offices in such countries and show that our whole profit is only because of this country. We are generating whole profit here in this country. For example, a MNC. So we will deal with it a bit later. An MNC which is located in 10 different nations. For example, South Africa, for example, Zimbabwe, India, and Ireland. Now, it will say my corporate office is there in Ireland, and I take all my decisions from here. It trades with all the nations. It says that all of my production is happening in Ireland, and then I am selling these goods to South Africa, New Zealand, and India. But actually, this production is not happening in Ireland. They are booking their profit, that is, booking the profit. They are showing their profit in the companies of Ireland only, in the parent company, and not in the subsidiaries. That is why they have to pay taxes in Ireland only and not anywhere else, which makes them to pay less tax, because Ireland is a tax haven, and that is a problem with GNP. Understood? So there are different limitations to GDP and GNP both. GNP, some more limitations of GNP, like informal sector is not calculated, income repatriation problem is there. Structural changes may disrupt the data, it will complicate the measurements. External debt will impact, because the more external debt we have, the more payment outside we are making. So thereby, GDP versus GNP, there are some key differences between the two. GDP talks about total value within borders. It talks about total value by residents only, irrespective of the borders. Domestic activities are only calculated. Hereby, we calculate both domestic and international activities. In the GDP, all the income within borders which is generated is calculated, while as residents' income from abroad also is included. This is GDP. C, that is consumption plus investment plus government expenditure plus exports minus imports. This much only, but hereby it is GDP plus net factor income from abroad. The focus is on domestic performance, the focus is on global residents. The focus is on the perspective is limited to domestic output only, while as it is global in view. Understood? Keep this definition in your mind so that you solve MCQs better. Understood? Now, high GNP relative to GDP. Why some countries with many citizens working abroad such as India experience positive net income from abroad. Why so? Because most of our Indians are working abroad and less of the foreigners are working here. Or I would say countries with many citizens who are working abroad such as India experience a significant positive net income from abroad, while as high GDP relative to GNP, countries hosting multinational corporations whose profits are repatriated may have higher GDP than GNP. Why so? Even this happens in India also. If a country's FDI is more, then it means that our GDP is inflating and we are not investing. First example is, if Indians are going outside and working abroad. Second is this example, that where Indians are investing in abroad. Now, these are two different scenarios. This scenario increases the GNP relative to GDP, reflecting strong international economic engagement by residents. However, this scenario says that domestic production benefits the foreign entities more than domestic residents. Understood? If there is more investment from abroad into Indian economy, it means the profits which are generated from Indian economy are repatriated back to foreign nations. While as if we talk about this, it means that our Indians are working abroad and they are bringing money home. Understood? Lastly, what are the key takeaways from both of them? That is, both of them are good measures of economy. They are essential for policy. However, they come with different limitations. Understood? GDP versus GNP. GDP is a geographical concept. Revise it back again with me. Geographical concept, and it talks about total market value of all the final goods and services which is produced in an economy by citizens. That is why the focus is on where are the goods produced. While as GNP, and from here you will see the definitions coming from the book. GNP is citizen based. It produced by citizens of a country both within the geography and abroad. That is, its focus is on who is producing the goods. Understood? Now, a German owned car manufacturer factory in India, its production will be counted in Germany's GNP and India's GDP. Second, if the TikTok revenues are generated out of USA, for example, US citizens are using TikTok, the income is generated in USA but is sent back to GNP of China because it is a Chinese company earning from US GDP. Understood? The revenues of TikTok will contribute to the GDP of USA, but it will be sent back to China, but the profits will go back to China and it will be calculated in the GNP of China. Closed economies which have no links to outside world will have GDP but not GNP. Their GDP will be equivalent to GNP because they have no links to outside world. Their economy is aloof or cut from the outside world. There is no economic connection between that domestic economy and outside world. Understood? Now, if you see, Japan has highly globalized with many MNCs abroad and GNP trends are more than GDP of Japan. Second, China was much more than had GDP more than GNP until 2010 because China had very less foreign MNCs. Understood? Now GNP is catching up and Belt and Road Initiative because China had less investment in the outside world. Till 2010, China allowed all of the countries of the world to invest in China and China was not investing outside. But from 2010, China started investing outside the world, in the outside world. China started investing in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, in Belt and Road Initiative, in CPEC. It started investing in multiple ports across the world. Understood? Further, India's GDP is slightly more than GNP. Why? Because India receives more FDI. India's inbound FDI is more than its outbound FDI. And foreign MNCs produce more in India than Indian MNCs abroad. That was the whole point which I was making, that Indian companies are investing less outside than what the other companies or MNCs from foreign are investing in India. Understood? So why GDP matters? It matters because it helps in creation of employment data. It helps in the policies regarding employment, tax revenues, demand and supply, and foreign reserves. I was giving you the example of Ireland, and that example is mentioned in the book also, that why Ireland's GDP exceeds its GNP. Because multinational companies, especially those companies which are related to technology and pharma, giants like Apple, Microsoft, they book their global profits. Wherever in the world they create profits, they book the profit to save corporate tax. Because they say that we earned all the profit from Ireland only, and we will pay tax in Ireland only because Ireland is a tax haven, and that is why all the companies, all the MNCs of tech and this particularly the tech companies and pharma companies, they are booking their profit in Ireland, so that they have to pay lesser tax in Ireland because it is a tax haven. Understood? Chalo. So 3 approaches to calculate GDP, all the 3 approaches must be same. The outcome, since the total expenditure should equal to value produced, which should equal to total income generated in the economy. Output approach talks about the market value of final goods and services produced. Expenditure approach talks about consumption, investment. Income approach talks about all of this. Understood? Final goods and, there is one more thing which you need to remember. Output approach talks about GDP. As per output approach is the total output equals to final goods minus intermediate goods. That is the output approach. And what are final goods? They are ready for consumption. Cars, desktops in the office. In the home, they are consumer goods. In the office, they are capital goods. Thereby, in the office, they are treated as the intermediate goods, and in the home, they are treated as final goods. Intermediate goods are only the final goods are counted in GDP. Intermediate goods are those goods which are used at the domestic level, which are used in the process of production, not consumed finally by the consumer. They are used for the process of production. For example, this whole setup in which I am using to record these videos, this is an intermediate good for our institute, because we are ultimately producing services. We are not selling or consuming these goods. So thereby, car tires sold to manufacturer are intermediate goods, but same tires if sold to consumer are final goods. Understood? But you also need to remember that what all is included in GDP and what is excluded out of GDP. So what GDP includes is only the new manufacturing goods or newly manufactured goods. Second hand goods or pastly manufactured goods will not be calculated. Service charges on the resale transactions. For example, if there is, or I would say, resale of second hand goods. For example, have you seen that there are multiple portals online like Magic Bricks, like No Broker, who provide you rental, I would say they will provide you that accommodations of rent. But are they selling it? Or if they are selling a house, for example, there is a house, there is a property A. In 2020, it was of 10 lakh rupees, and now it was posted to No Broker, and they sold it of rupees 15 lakh rupees. Understood? They sold it of 15 lakh rupees. Now tell me, this 5 lakh rupees, what is this 5 lakh rupees? And how much tax or how much income has been generated out of it? Or tell me, once this sale is done, this 5 lakh rupees, is it a national income or is it produced in the economy? Or if this is not done, if the sale is not done, I have a property worth 10 lakh rupees. It was worth 10 lakh rupees in 2010. But today, if I revalue it, it is worth I would say 100 lakh rupees in 2025. I am not selling it. There is just the value of the property. Now tell me, are the two transactions different? Where is the production actually happening? Is this production happening in case number 1 or is the production happening in case number 2? Now give me the answer in comment section. Next, indirect taxes accumulated on products. Indirect taxes which are accumulated on products like GDP. Imputed values like rental value of all the properties. If you are renting your property or the rent which an home or which I have on my home. If I am living in my own home, then the rent of that home has to be included in the GDP. That rent imputed on the home which is foregone because I am not paying it to anyone because it is my home, that rent has to be calculated in the GDP. Understood? And is calculated. Which is excluded? What are the goods which are excluded? For example, second-hand goods are not included. Homemakers unpaid work like your mother working in your home or my mother working in my home is not imputed. Self-performed or intermediate goods or self-performed services like cleaning your own house is not calculated. Intermediate goods are not calculated in GDP. Understood? Real versus nominal GDP, we already calculated it or we already saw it. Real GDP is based on the constant prices and nominal GDP is based on the current prices. This is valued at base year and this is valued at current year production but current year prices. This is base year price, this is current year price. Understood? GDP, GVA and factor cost already discussed. NDP is net domestic product, GVA is gross value addition and factor cost is market price minus net indirect taxes. Understood? GDP deflator is something which is important because it gives us the difference between the real prices and the current year prices. With this, we come to an end of this discussion and hereby we complete GDP and GNP. Tomorrow, we will be discussing for the next chapter, National Income Accounting. Understood? With this, let's conclude and say goodbye to each other. I will be waiting for you in the next lecture. I hope you complete all the lecture series and you complete all the book with me. Thank you once again. Jai Hind.